Majority Report with Sam Seder, where every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, June 29th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. It's Casual Friday, folks. I am wearing my soft-collared shirt, as is the case on Fridays. Pair of Zumbas. Joining me in studio today for Casual Friday, Nomiki Konst.
Hi. Not casual.
Also on the program, country braces for the Supreme Court and Handmaid's Tale crossover episode. Meanwhile, in Baltimore, 5 dead in a shooting at a local newspaper. ICE agents join the Abolish ICE movement. And over 550 people arrested in protests in the Capitol protesting the U.S. policy of kidnapping immigrant children. And as the State Department releases a report that says its so-called child separation program increases trafficking, mass protests tomorrow. More information at familiesbelongtogether.org. New reports Trump undercutting the EU and, I don't know if I have a problem with this, the WTO. And speaking of civility, there are still nearly 24 states in this country where you can get fired for being gay, as half of LGBTQ folks not out at work. All this and more on today's program. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, in studio with us today. And it's always fun to have people in studio. Nomiki Konst, she is an advisor to Our Revolution, formerly TYT. And also, you sat or sit on the commission. What is the technical name for this commission?
The technical name is the DNC, Democratic National Committee, Unity Reform Commission.
Okay, and this was a commission that was set up at the 2018...
16.
Oh, Jesus Christ. It was 2 years ago.
It was.
DNC, to basically reform some of the practices of the DNC that people had issue with, obviously, and larger issues, and with the way that they were running the primary, in that it was exclusionary. And there was some news this week, so very fortuitous to have you in studio.
I was supposed to be here last week, and then I canceled on you for...
And it's better. It's better
stuff.
Because now we have you after this has been resolved. Plus, I also have to say, you're the first person I think we've ever had in studio who even had the consciousness of saying, which one is my camera? I think...
and you know what? I don't even realize I'm on camera right now. That's the bad part. I'm checking my phone.
No, that's exactly the way we roll here. Michael Brooks generally sits there and
checks his phone.
People are very concerned if he's not checking his phone. All right. I want to get into that stuff, but let's start the show off because you're also you've been heavily involved in New York politics for years.
Yeah.
And I want to just start with this clip we have of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's already a national figure.
I can't believe this is amazing.
And she was on Colbert last night explaining what her democratic socialism, or what democratic socialism, I should say, means to her. This is clip number 2. And let's hear that now.
Democratic districts. There's a good shot that you're going to go to Congress, while not guaranteed. You said you
pause it for 1 second. We should just say that her opponent in the general election, the Republican, he is a men's rights advocate.
He's also raised zero money. That was the story today. Zero donations in the last week.
People don't want to bet on a losing horse.
Yes. Well, wait till this message of men's rights advocacy gets out, and so before we judge. But here is Colbert.
You might be able to get people to get on board with your agenda. What is your agenda? Because you describe yourself as a democratic socialist, and that's not an easy term for a lot of Americans. What is the meaning of that for you? What does socialist mean to you?
For me, democratic socialism is about really the value for me is that I believe that in a modern, moral, and wealthy society, no person in America should be too poor to live. That's what I think.
That seems simple.
Seems pretty simple. So what that means to me is healthcare as a human right. It means that every child, no matter where you are born, should have access to a college or trade school education if they so choose it. And, I think that no person should be homeless if we can have public structures and public policy to allow for people to have homes and food and lead a dignified life in the United States.
Super scary stuff. Super scary stuff. And there she is on Colbert. And Jamie, you were saying that in the wake of her election, there was a huge surge in DSA membership.
Yeah, I see this. This is a very definitely verified tweet from a Washington Post reporter. He said the Democratic Socialists of America report their biggest single-day jump in membership ever following Ocasio 2018's victory Tuesday, with over 1,000 people joining in 24 hours. And it was our biggest bump ever so far, bigger than the bump after Trump's election, as well as the bump after Disrupt J20, right around similar time, which was about 800 each. And we're now over 40,000 members.
Wow, that's double, I feel like it was
nationwide,
in 2016.
which is just fucking crazy and cool as hell. And, I've been an electoral skeptic in the past in terms of how these kinds of tactics are going to serve our long-term horizon of transitioning to a socialist society built around human needs and not profits. But one key goal, and I just reread the electoral strategy document, so I made sure I knew what I was talking about. Like, one really important task facing us right now is to build our base and make contact with more of the working class. And that is clearly happening based on our work with Ocasio-Cortez, and I hope it'll continue to happen. So got to give credit where credit's due.
And Nomi, from your perspective, like where does this fit in terms of New York politics? I mean, how much? What are the implications for New York politics? Seem to me to be pretty big when you're looking at Cynthia Nixon, who's running against Cuomo. How much impact does it have in terms of New York?
It was earth-shattering. I'll give you an example. Other than the fact that the Speaker, Corey Johnson, came out. And New York politics is like 12-dimensional chess. So bear with me a little bit, but I know people love process. It's real fun right now. It's
right.
Like the new it thing. DSA just sits there for 3 hours and talks process. It's great, actually. But that's where all the stuff is hidden, is in the process. So the new speaker of the city council got his position through Joe Crowley. Joe Crowley, who's also the head of the Queen's Machine, right? The Queen's Democratic Machine, which is very important in New York politics. Joe Crowley was one of the signers on this independent Democratic conference deal to make those. He backed the IDC, essentially.
Okay, and let me just tell people, the IDC is a group of like eight Democrats, ostensibly Democrats, who caucus with the Republicans, really in exchange. I mean, it's sort of amazing how brazen it is. It's literally in exchange for money.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to give you a bigger office. We're going to give you resources. And New York politics is the line between. I'm not familiar with the laws, but it feels like you can get money for your office as a state senator and use it to buy yourself stuff. I mean, it basically feels like
larger offices. The communications director of the IDC, who now works for the Republicans, she was getting paid more than twice what the senators were being paid.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's just a huge slush fund that they were just given to caucus with the Republicans. And Andrew Cuomo not only sort of gave his blessing, but almost like midwifed it.
He invented the IDC.
And
he actually designed it.
And this was a way for him to avoid having to ever sign legislation that two houses of Democrats in New York State, a fairly liberal state, would be sending him because he didn't want to taint his future prospects as a president, ostensibly thinking that he was going to run in 1993, I guess.
And not to mention, it's not just that he was doing this 90s era-esque Clintonian game, right? Triangulation. He also was using the fact that the Senate was holding up the Republican-led Senate because these Democrats were caucusing with Republicans. He was using them to block any sort of ethics reform. We have the loosest campaign finance laws in this country, so he is taking advantage of these things called the LLC loopholes, which basically LLCs can give an extraordinary amount of money. You can set up 150 LLCs. Now, who does that? Real estate interests do that.
Yes.
And so he has been raising, he's $31 million in his coffers. There is a legal way for him to use that money and move it into a super PAC to support his presidential campaign.
Right.
And that is what is being buried in all of this noise. But just to go back to your original point, because this is really important, how democratic socialism has affected New York State and how it's going to affect the DNC. Corey Johnson, the speaker, who's young, he's openly gay, LGBTQ, he has AIDS, he's HIV. Excuse me, I shouldn't. He's HIV positive.
Okay.
He's been very open about his experience and transformative. He went out and he backed the no IDC candidates, all the candidates running against the IDC members, going against Joe Crowley, who got him his position just a few months ago.
Wow. Okay.
So that happened just 2 days ago, right? I had a meeting with a lawmaker in New York State. There's a lot of lawmakers, so I don't want to give this away. But somebody who you would never think in a million years would ask me this. First thing this person said to me when I sat down and had coffee with them yesterday, because everybody wants to understand who she is.
Right.
He says, I'd like to join DSA. I said, what? They now see it as, oh my gosh, it's this
imprimatur that is going to, right.
They're going to organize for us, but the politics weren't that far off. It's just, it was such a foreign concept. And frankly, what Joe Crowley, he received all these endorsements from unions, and the unions have been a line of defense for these machine politicians, but they didn't deliver. And it's not that the union members didn't deliver. The union leadership is very different in New York State. It's complicated. It's
very highly transactional. And so you'll see, and we saw this with Zephyr Teachout's run, and we see this with Cynthia Nixon's run against Cuomo. They make a calculation we cannot afford because of the highly transactional nature and opaque nature of the politics. We can't afford to mess with Cuomo because he will... And down the line, he will screw us.
And he has in the past.
Yep.
He went out in an all-out war against unions just 6 years ago after he was elected. Teachers' unions in particular. There were... The teachers' union in New York had put up billboards calling out Andrew Cuomo for being against unions and teachers. And now they have a friendship again.
Sure.
It's a very complicated relationship. So I wouldn't... the unions aren't supporting or turning people out. I don't know if that's intentional or if it's just the weakening of unions because of Andrew Cuomo, but it's essentially hurting even the establishment Democrats who rely on them for support.
And so there are people sort of fishing around for another base of that will generate boots on the ground, essentially, and do this work. I mean, what level of, because you spend a lot of time with politicians like this, how sophisticated are they? Let me put it this way. I don't want to ask how stupid are most of them, but It strikes me that that's the way the calculation is. It's like, oh, that is a shiny thing over there that looks like it could work for me. And there's no other implications really, or it's just like, how can I position myself? Because I feel to a certain extent, we see a lot of this, broadly speaking, in the Democratic Party.
Right.
And I just don't pay attention to the Republican Party in the same way, although I think that they are actually, the lunatics now run the asylum in the Republican Party. For a while, for decades, I think that they would kowtow to them, and then at one point, they just became them. In the Democratic Party, at least from my perspective,
lunatics run our asylum too.
Well, yes,
They
but
run
they're
the chessboard.
But they're right. But they're different ones, right? I mean, like they do not the base is pushing the party to the left in a way that it has not in at least in the better part of my lifetime, and certainly the more so in the past 5-10 years than I've saw in the decades before that. How much of it is even like an awareness of what they're adopting, or how much of it is just like, this is where the energy is, I'm going there?
I think that for those who have political ambitions, and it's not going to cost them anything right now, and a perfect example would be all these more neoliberal, younger senators who are lining up for Medicare for All and for Bernie's policies. It really doesn't cost them anything right now because they
don't have to take a vote, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're not the majority, and it looks good, and it gets a younger group of voters. It's when they do things like say they're no longer taking corporate money or they're no longer taking pharmaceutical money that I think that's where we're really attacking the root, and that has happened in the Senate with the Democrats, with some of them. But I think we're winning the moral argument right now, as Alex Ocasio-Cortez just said. I think we're winning the issues arguments right now, even across the board with Republicans too, across demographics. When you talk about economics and income inequality, it affects pretty much everybody in this country. The electoral, I think, why this was so transformative is because you could not identify two more difficult places to run for office than the Bronx and Queens in terms of the machine. And Alex Ocasio-Cortez annihilated somebody who was being chosen to be the next speaker, most likely,
right,
because not just because he raised money, not because he was like some sort of likable guy, because he was very good at controlling people, but he couldn't even control his own machine.
Right. That's interesting. I mean, this is a guy who had real skills. This is not an unskilled politician.
Oh, yeah.
And how much do you think he was aware that this was happening? I mean, it wasn't like the David Bratt, Eric Cantor thing where I think like Eric Cantor showed up in his district 3 weeks before the election and was like, hey, wait a second, what's going on here? I feel like Crowley has been aware of this as a problem for at least like 3 or 4 months, at least.
I think yes and no. I mean, I think that they were worried about her breaking past maybe like 30% and embarrassing him as he went into the speaker or the
right,
whatever race he's, depending on what happens in the House, right? But let's not forget, and I tweeted about this yesterday, about how journalists go to elected officials for electoral advice or strategy, and a lot of these elected officials, Cuomo, Crowley, not everybody, they walked into their seats. Schumer's different, actually. Schumer hustled his way in.
Right.
He fought, and you can see it sometimes. It comes out. He has a sense of where the wind is blowing. I don't agree with a lot of his policies and who backs him, but he does have a sense of where the wind is blowing on the ground. Crowley inherited that seat. He was a staffer for the previous congressman. And the way that New York politics works is most 7 out of 10, I think, elected officials end up inheriting their seats by county committee, because the county committee basically decides who the Democratic nominee is going to be when there's a special election. And there are a lot of special elections in New York for corruption, for retirement, a whole bunch of reasons. And that's what, he inherited the seat. He's never had a real opposition. He basically lives in Virginia. As Alex Ocasio-Cortez says, he doesn't drink the water. His kids don't go to our schools. So there's a disconnect. And, that meeting I went to with that lawmaker the other day, and he's a good guy. He's actually very progressive, so I shouldn't, he's not like all other politicians. He asked me my perspective after we kind of broke down the numbers. He said, it's like when a farmer is on a farm and they feel that day the previous year it was 2 degrees cooler. real sophisticated politicians know when things are moving just by the slightest degree. And those are people who are connected to the roots. Those are people who know what their voters are like. Those are people who go around in their neighborhoods and talk to the business owners. Those are people who are listening. And that's what Alex was paying attention to. Joe Crowley had no clue what the temperature was like in his district at all. Last year, the year before, the last 15 years.
I mean, I sort of feel that's a perfect metaphor for someone like Nancy Pelosi with the entire caucus, and not just the entire caucus, the entire party. Because in the main, I am supportive of Nancy Pelosi. I think, you know, in her capacity as both a majority and a minority leader, you know, she never took a vote that she didn't win. I mean, she knew what was going on with that caucus. But I think her sense of what's going on in national politics now, I think we've gone past some type of tipping point where she seems completely adrift. I think Chuck Schumer also completely adrift.
Absolutely.
And no sense of not just even, and I'm just talking from just sheer political assessment and what, like the idea that they would come out with PAYGO a couple of weeks ago is just bizarre to me. Yeah. The idea that Chuck Schumer is talking about, gas prices or afraid to get involved in the mix where we are kidnapping children at the border is insane. Like Jeff Merkley, when he went down there, it felt like he was going rogue.
Right.
And because he was
going rogue.
He was. And that is stunning that there are just opportunity after opportunity after opportunity in terms of politics, and they seem completely out of touch. And I don't know if it's just a function of you're in the leadership for too long. If you're in the leadership for too long and you're also like pushing your late 70s, early 80s with a lot of these folks, and add in the rate of change on the ground, all those things combined make it feel like they've been jettisoned into the ether and have no sense of what's going on. I mean, one of the things that I'm very encouraged about is, and Crowley, I think sort of ironically, was probably the most in touch of the leadership of the Democratic Party.
Right.
But he still was like part of that generation on some level. And that opening there creates an opening for people who are a little bit more. I just feel like sometimes you need to break that up, like, and I think that's pretty positive. All right, so I want to also talk to you about what you've been doing on this commission, because there's a couple of things. I mean, first, tell us about well, let's start with this. I know you've pushed caucuses in the past. Is that right or no?
No, that was a smear campaign oh my goodness, that's how far it permeated. Oh, this drove me crazy. So during the Reform Commission, there was a very coordinated effort, funded effort to smear members in the commission who are outspoken about reforms. And people like Joy Reid and Neera Tanden just said these things openly. I mean, I made complaints to MSNBC that none of us it wasn't one or the other. There were 4 areas of reform. We don't have the ability to eliminate primaries and put caucuses in. It was about reforming caucuses.
Right, this is all states.
Primaries.
This is all that states do. Right.
And it was infuriating because we just kept having to set the record straight, and they just kept smearing.
Well, is there anybody out there who's pushing caucuses over primaries?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. All right, good. Because I was, and I guess I fell victim to that. And there, that this notion of like, and it wasn't, a huge deal. It just didn't make sense to me. Like, why would you push a caucus? It's not necessarily any more, it doesn't seem to achieve any of the aims that anybody associated with it wants. It's less democratic. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with them, although, maybe it's like a secondary thing, but it's less democratic. And it's not necessarily open to, it almost runs contrary to the idea of like more open primaries, but we'll go to that.
Let me give you the alternative, because the irony of this was that I was being attacked for having some sort of weird caucus agenda over primaries when I actually had your perspective going in, and I was enlightened because, we had these experts, people who'd worked in caucus states, people, we looked at literally there were 4 areas that we were concerned with. Party reform, which is a big bucket, they called it, and I was on the party reform committee. Primary reform, I was involved in that because I'm from New York and it has the worst primary. Caucus reform and superdelegate reform. And so we had experts in all these areas as we traveled around the country, and we debated. I mean, this was a commission. The majority of the commission was Hillary supporter of Hillary appointees. What I learned was actually fascinating regarding caucuses. You look at the country right now, and most of the state legislatures are Republican controlled. And of those or in our state, yeah, Republican controlled
right.
in New York. So the primary rules, the primary process is overseen by Republicans. Under caucuses, the majority of caucuses are in more conservative states, some exceptions, and they need reform. All of them need reforms. But those caucuses are overseen by the Democratic Party. It's a way for the Democratic Party to kind of protect their process away from voter suppression. And there were countless examples that were used. We had legal experts come in, and it blew my mind. So I see the argument for why caucuses are important in some states. It wouldn't work in a state like New York. It wouldn't work in others, Florida. But
that's interesting. And so if it's a Republican-controlled state, things like the dates of primaries, like are we going to do state and
voter
federal
ID
at the same
laws.
time? Right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Whereas caucuses, you don't impose voter ID laws, or, I mean, yeah, okay. I mean, I think there's definitely an argument for them as a secondary tool on some level, right?
And
or
I think the arguments that people make against caucuses were all addressed in the Reform Commission. Accessibility, are you disabled? How long should you be there all day? We recommended a set of reforms that were, I think, profound.
And where are those reforms in the have they? Does that committee even have the ability to implement these things, or just suggestions to state parties?
Well, it's a little complicated. So, the DNC Reform Commission. We've had several commissions in the past. In fact, superdelegates were invented at the Hunt Commission in 1981, and now they're soon going to be gone. Thank goodness. But these commissions actually do a lot for the rules of the party. And it's been behind closed doors in the past, but there's been a lot of attention. So the report was issued before the Rules and Bylaws Committee. Okay. So think like Congress. This is how it works. It goes from committee to committee and then goes for a final vote. So the Rules and Bylaws Committee had met for the last few months, and actually they're doing their final vote on one other thing in a few weeks, but they voted on the superdelegates issue just a few days ago, 2 days ago. Then it goes, the whole entire set of recommendations go before the larger DNC at the end of August in Chicago. And that's actually good. We were worried about the Rules and Bylaws Committee because they're all appointed, and none of the Bernie people were on the Rules and Bylaws Committee.
Right, okay.
Not one person. So we actually did fairly well there, and they wanted to take some of our recommendations further. Because don't forget, our commission was compromised. Nina Turner and I, we both voted to eliminate superdelegates, and we abstained, I should say, from the vote because we didn't believe it went far enough. And the RBC, the Rules and Bylaws Committee, actually took it further.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
And so, all right, so tell us, what is happening with superdelegates? I mean, I have to tell you that for me, outside of, I'm not convinced. The biggest problem with superdelegates from my perspective has always been that it creates a sense of momentum in the media narrative that isn't necessarily there.
Correct.
And I think that the impact of that can be overstated. I mean, I think AOC's victory against Crowley on some level is an example of the media narrative doesn't always dictate.
But the media never paid attention to that race at all.
That's true. That's
except
true.
for our lefty friends like The Intercept.
That's true. That's true. But with that said, I think there is. Well, tell me what the reform is, because the only value I saw to the superdelegates was let's say you have a candidate who gets indicted from June to. I mean, it shouldn't happen that way. I mean, specifically, that is. But I mean, clearly, sometimes it who knows? You can't count on. Well, you get a candidate who's indicted, or there's some evidence that comes out there oh my God, there's video of them killing somebody. We need to stop this before the election.
Having lunch with Donald Trump,
or having lunch with Donald Trump, or whatever it is. I mean, so I think there's some. I don't know what that mechanism is. Right. Well, yes, exactly. But
that was an ironic joke there because it actually was an issue.
But so what is the reform, and is there still a mechanism to hit the emergency brake?
Yeah. Well, there's always been a mechanism to hit the emergency brake outside of superdelegates. The chair I don't think this is the right mechanism, but the chair of the party actually has authority to like pick another candidate if they want to.
That's terrifying.
That's
to me.
crazy.
Right.
Especially.
Right.
Anyways, I'm going to cut that off before the vote for the DNC.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so superdelegates, the funny thing about this is that the intention of superdelegates in 1981 were to be just that they weren't supposed to declare who they were supporting until they were on the convention floor in this sort of emergency situation. I remember being on CBS News in 2016. I think it was maybe 2 months before the California primaries, or whatever that was, April, May. And they had at that point basically declared, even though it was right after New York, so they had declared the race for Hillary, and everybody was talking about superdelegates. I said, you're counting the superdelegates in the delegates, but the superdelegates don't count until the convention.
Right, they're not committed yet.
They're not
they can
committed.
change their mind. They do all the. I mean, they've done in the past.
They've done all that, but you can't. But it's not. It's technically against the rules.
Right.
It was already against the rules, and I got into such a debate about this, even with a political reporter there, that I had to pull up the rules of the Democratic Party and show it to them on air, because there was such a false narrative.
And was that the last time that you went on air?
No, I'm actually a contributor there
Oh,
still.
well, there you go.
And P.S. He's fired now for a Me Too scandal. I feel like I can say that out loud.
There you go. Hold on. Let's do
Karma.
this.
Hell yeah.
They haven't had me on though in a while, so
Well, there you go.
yeah. But now the rule is this: that yes, there's still super delegates, and I see people on Twitter saying, "Well, there's still super delegates. You haven't eliminated." There's still super delegates, but they cannot vote on the first ballot. It's when it gets to the second ballot that they will have the ability to vote. I mean, what else are you going to do when there's a stalemate?
So basically, okay, so they only come in if it is undecided, essentially, by the delegates who are actually decided by the people who voted for them.
And it's not all super delegates. The reduction is basically the electeds that are left, the congressional members.
Those, all right. Well, those are the second ones or the first? I mean,
Yeah, it's confusing. I know.
Okay, no. But I mean, I understand. So
Yeah.
there are two types of superdelegates generally. There are sort of like dignitaries from the Democratic Party,
Right.
and then there are some who are like sitting politicians. And the sitting politicians get to vote in the first round. Is that
No,
it? Or no?
nobody gets to vote in the first
Nobody
round.
first gets to. In the second round, it's only basically.
Yeah.
So the dignitaries are just now they get to like they have a key. They get a key. We're going to give you a badge and a medal, and you're a superdelegate.
Yeah.
Wink, wink. Keep donating money.
Yeah,
Type of
and
situation.
there's been these like crazy responses that are just not they're not based on any sort of reality. There were some racial elements that were brought up saying it protects the African American vote. There's just no evidence of that at all. It's actually the reversal. I mean,
That's the superdelegates protect the African American vote.
I don't really. I actually haven't even heard the defense of that. I've heard the argument. I haven't heard the facts. And I was on this commission, and I just kept hearing it over and over. And I said, okay, so show me the proof, because superdelegates. I understand why they were. It was at a time when there wasn't a black caucus in Congress.
Right.
And so I get that side of it. But one superdelegate equals 10,000 votes. So if you're reflecting the will of the voter and you're a member of the CBC, then you're actually protecting your people by actually voting with your district.
Right.
So it just didn't make sense to me. It's going to go before the DNC still for a larger vote. I think it would be crazy at this point for the DNC to vote against the RBC. It would just be a bad media situation.
It seems unlikely to me. I mean, at the DNC this past time, I was talking to, is it Christine Pelosi?
Yeah.
And the first thing she talked about was like, we really do got to do this superdelegate. We've got to reform the superdelegate. I mean, so it seems to be like broad understanding of it, because it causes, frankly, more problems than it solves. The big problem that it should solve is that it is an emergency brake.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, their power lies in the media narrative of people being, sloppy about it.
They like to have power.
Of course.
And not every congressman. There were a lot of congressmen who've stepped forward. They've signed our letter in support of the reforms. But some, it's just, they love it. They say it. They openly say it. They're like, we earned this. No, you walked into your congressional seat, Joe Crowley. What did you earn?
Exactly. All right. Well, let me ask you. I mean, I want to broaden out just for the past week, and I appreciate that insight into that process because I think it is so much like toxic crap came out of the whole process with the DNC that spun out in multiple directions. It seems to me that I think incredibly unhelpful, particularly at this time.
Can I make one more point about that?
Yeah.
Sorry, before we move on. I also think that while superdelegates are tremendously important, they're not the root problem with the Democratic Party right now. And they've almost become a distraction, whether intentionally or not. I think both. Away from the issues like where's the money going, are states parties being supported, how are we going to win back these races, and also like there's a privatization effort. Like there's outside organizations who are doing the work of the DNC right now and with no oversight.
Well, let's ask. Let me ask you about that since you have insight into it, because what we're talking about is really, on one level, first order problem is distinct from politics and ideology. It is really just a systemic. It's just that you have an institution that has become sclerotic and corrupted in many respects, and because no one's really been paying attention to it in some way. Like people are making money. No one's going to lift up the lid and look in there and see what's going on. And that is completely distinct from an ideological. I mean, there may be some things may track it. Like, if you have people who really think that money is the ascendant value and I get into a system, that's what I'm going to pull out of it. But in terms of the way that I think most people understand politics as, a function of issue sets and this and that. That's not what they're there for. They're there because they're enriching themselves.
Yes.
It's a lot like, almost like in some ways, local politics. How wide is the understanding of that? What is going to deal with it? Because, there's multiple forces where you have like the Obama people really wanted to maintain control, it seems to me, of not so much the machine. Like I didn't get the sense that the Obama people wanted, because they were making the money from it, as much as like, we don't want the party to move in a direction that we sort of think is politically wrong, but they're willing to maintain an apparatus that is inherently dysfunctional. I mean, it seems like, it's just by definition of it's losing races across the country in races that in an environment where it shouldn't have. I mean, 2008, we should have been able to get rid of, like, there shouldn't have, people would have to look in the history books to see what a Republican Party is. I mean, theoretically, if we had been, if the party apparatus had been functioning the way it should have been. So how do you dislodge that? Because it's really basically what you're trying to do is keep people from making money the only way they know how. And people tend to, like, in my experience, hold on to that very tightly.
Yeah, especially if their identities are attached to it, and
of course,
and no one's ever looked into.
So this is a problem that people have, like, in businesses too. Like, how do we get rid of this culture in this business?
Yeah. So this was my pet issue. Maybe some of your listeners and viewers saw the video that went viral, the last commission, where I basically had a meltdown and I dropped an F-bomb on the floor. Well, the backstory on that was, first thing, it was after 8 months of debating this. We just come out of a room where we had an agreement on one of my resolutions. Then we went onto the floor, and all the other side, they started questioning it. And so right before me, Gus Newport, one of our appointees, he said something very powerful, and he said it was ridiculous. And then it was my resolution, so I just flipped the heck out. But I think you have a couple issues here at play. Human nature. People want to keep their money, and this is what they've attached themselves to. And there's a lot of people who literally failed up in Democratic politics. In fact, I'd say the majority of consultants out there are just failing up and giving really bad advice. So if you plan on running for office, most of them are full of shit.
And let me just say this, just so that people understand sort of what intersects with this conversation. I interviewed Ryan Grimm about his piece in The Intercept, which talked about DNC and DCCC representatives coming into campaigns, often choosing the wrong people, and sort of bigfooting the local people in many respects. There was another report by Theda Skocpol and Lena Putnam that showed the same dynamic, not with the ideological differences. I mean, you're talking about people who might be, sort of, just sort of mainstream Democrats, but also feeling the same way of like, hey, wait a second, the people are coming in and they're bigfooting us. And they're not listening to people on the ground who have a sense of what's going on in the district. And so it's you have these stories of a dysfunctional system within the party that I think is less ideological and more sort of like systematized, or there's got to be some business management term for what the problem is.
So I think it's intentional. I'm at this point in the game, and I think if I had said this 2 months ago, I'd been called a conspiracy theorist. I think at this point in the game, it's so clear that this model doesn't work, but then it's so clear that some of these people and these ideas, after being called out so openly, they're being exposed and they're still doing it. There's some other thing happening. I'm going to rewind a little bit. In the late 70s, the Democratic Party purged union. They literally made a decision with the DLC. The DLC, I'm not fucking around here when I say this. I can say fuck, right?
Yeah, but not the DLC, not the Democratic Leadership Council.
The DLC, this is important. The DLC, one of their earliest investors, is in the 80s though, was the Koch brothers, but it was all around that time.
But this is 1980.
1980, right.
Now, in the early 70s,
late 70s, I'm saying.
In the early 70s, unions were pushed to the sideline by the McGovern Commission. In fact, that's where the whole superdelegates reform came from, because they didn't want it the back room, and they didn't want just the union heads to be. And there was an attempt to move towards the suburbs, and we've done a couple of interviews on that over the past couple of years. But yes, but in the 80s,
this movement, right?
There was an idea of like, we need more corporate money.
Exactly. So you had the purging, the actual DNC members being purged, the union members being purged and replaced with corporate members. I think it was. I don't think they legalized lobbyists then. I think that was later. But
Tony Coelho. Yeah. Right. Okay. So go ahead. But
love that guy. So this was all happening, and at the same time, the centralization of the DNC happened. So what does that mean? It means that the DNC is no longer putting all of its money into state parties, and it was the death of the clubs. I mean, there were clubs everywhere, precinct captains. It was an investment in neighborhood democratic politics, which really was hand in hand with unions. If you think about unions, I had a friend of mine say this the other day. He's a consultant, and he was trying to find somebody for somebody's campaign. I'm not going to say who. And he is a very good consultant. Like, there's not many, but he's kind of like the guy that you call for help in the end. And he said, there's
no infrastructure.
There's no infrastructure. He goes, there's no talent. There's no talent being groomed. And he said it used to be that the unions worked with the Democrats on this. And when you kill unions, when you kick them out of your party, when the Koch brothers are going after them state by state, now, I mean, the Janus ruling, whatever's left of them, these were the organizers.
Right.
These were the precinct captains. And at the same time, the Democratic Party decides they're only going to focus on presidential politics, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The only time we kind of went back was in 2006 when we won the House.
And we should say these decisions were made at a time where the Democratic Party had controlled the House, the House for 40 years.
Yes.
There was never a time, and these guys, I don't know if you appreciate this, there was never a time where the Democrats did not control Congress in the entire post-war period. And so they felt like, we don't need to do anything about it. We don't need this infrastructure. We got to play this game of like 30,000 feet. We'll deal only with the president because we'll never have to worry about Congress. And of course, in the mid-90s, then that falls apart.
Is insane. So unions are being attacked.
Certainly in retrospect, I don't know. I don't know at that time if some type of redeploying of your, I can understand why someone might get cocky over 40 years, like, we got this. And
I mean, listen, but Governor Cuomo has accepted more money from the Koch brothers than Scott Walker did.
Right.
At some point, we just have to sit there and say to ourselves, is the tail wagging the dog, or is the dog? I mean, like, this is. It's not that the Koch brothers invested in state parties because the Democrats were no longer investing, which is the message I kept hearing. I'm hearing, why the hell did the Democrats stop investing in their state parties and weaken the party? It's basically disaster capitalism for the Democratic Party. And then as a result, they have all these private entities where they bring the billionaires in and the Democracy Alliance, and there's no oversight.
Right.
And suddenly the billionaires know better about electoral politics. And, the new Eric Holder Obama group to protect legislatures. Where the hell were you over the last 8 years? You essentially didn't pay attention to the DNC and the DLCC, whose job that is.
Right. Let me tease out what you mean by this
Sorry,
disaster
getting into
capitalism. No, I mean, I think this is a really interesting point. The idea being that once you deplete the infrastructure, the sort of the disaggregated infrastructure that is, I don't want to get overly dramatic, but more democratic and dispersed, and it's hierarchical because it's a system,
Right.
but it is staffed. It comes from communities
Yes.
up, and it populates it up that way. And once that's gone, then you come in and say like, oh, well, we need an infrastructure. The only way to get that is to buy it. And we're going to buy it with a huge amount of money. We're going to, come from outside of town, and we're going to build it from like that, which is exactly, the model of disaster capitalism. And all of a sudden now the authority shifts from the local people and the infrastructure to the big money people who've just parachuted in. And they're also, not only is it bad in terms of who has control, but it also is repeatedly less effective.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. And we've seen that dramatically. And simultaneously, on the right, we've seen the growth in particular of, and I think this is why it's, of mega churches and of religious institutions that have filled this void. And then a huge amount of money that comes in from the Koch brothers. And the way they spend money is pretty adept. Like they spread it around like, we're going to, 1,000 flowers are going to bloom.
And they're strategic. They're very strategic about where they're investing, who they're investing in, listen, Scott Walker, they
groomed him from like when
Exactly.
he was like a county, I don't know,
Yeah.
a dog catcher or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's they wage wars in areas that they know they can win. We don't do that as Democrats. I will say there was this brief period, obviously it was over a decade ago, but in 2006 when we won back the House, there's no coincidence that, and granted there was an anti-war movement and a lot of stuff was happening, and
Corruption was the big, anti-corruption was
yes.
the big thing.
But we also invested in every state under Howard Dean's DNC.
Yes.
And there's this book, gosh, what is it called? It's Lindsay Marks. He was the former finance director of the DNC during that time. And he talks about the inner fundraising, like the rise of fundraising in the Democratic Party. And it's fascinating because at the end of the book, there's this moment where he's discussing Senator Schumer, Rahm Emanuel, and Howard Dean sitting in the room talking about this program to invest in states. And Rahm Emanuel at that time, who was a congressman at the time, was also the head of the DCCC. And he was fighting with Dean about the 50-state strategy because he goes, why invest in states when we're not competitive states? Why should we invest there? And to me, that's the essence of their argument is like, why should we spend our money everywhere when we could just spend it in a couple of places? But that's based on an assumption of the DCCC understanding what that district is going through. And what we're seeing is places like John Ossoff. What?
Right.
How many million? $40 million? What was that?
Right.
$40 million on that race for somebody who like basically didn't grow, wasn't even from there, had no, was a staffer. Nothing wrong with being a staffer, but like milquetoast, boring.
Well, right. I mean, John Ossoff wins. It's not really going to change the tide of anything. It's not like we're going to install like it's Tip O'Neill, and he's just been out of office for 2 years. We got to get him back in.
Right.
It's not like even winning doesn't seem like the return on investment. Even if he wins, doesn't seem that high.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a real it's a real problem, and I wonder. Give me your sense of. I guess it is to break that log jam. Is there another way to go around it? Is something like the DSA on some level seems to be, I mean, it doesn't have nearly the resources, to compete, but it has I should restate that. In places where it's strong, it clearly has resources that aren't necessarily dollar-based, right? There's services in kind, because you have motivated people. But that's not an answer for 2018 or
every
even
election,
2020.
right.
I mean, it's what is the answer? Is there an answer? And
well, we do have to reform the DNC, and while the DNC is not the DCCC or the DSCC, it helps that if we actually flip the model the way that we've been pushing, and I do think that there's an appetite for that in the DNC membership, and I want to make that, a lot of people
there's
are
like 470 members of the DNC.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
I think so.
Well, let's just call it 450 for the sake of argument. How aware are these people? Because
Very aware.
most of the people I meet who are members of the DNC are not they're not Darth Vader. I mean, I think there may be a couple of Darth Vaders in Washington.
There are definitely some Darth Vaders in the DNC, but there are also a lot of good people who understand their districts. They ran for DNC. They are involved. They're involved. Not as many union people anymore, but I would say this is the way I break it down when I try to explain to people where the DNC stands. It's not like this entity, this megalith that they all think the same way. That's not how it functions. It's a diverse group from all 50 states and the territories and abroad, Democrats abroad. And I would say there's 35% of the DNC have conflicts of interests. They're lobbyists. They literally make money off the DNC. They've worked at the DNC. They're in and out.
That to me is like the typical I live in a small town. I'm going to join the United Way, and the United Way needs to print some flyers. I happen to own a printing company.
That's exactly it.
I mean, it's basically that type of dynamic, right?
Except the guy who's printing the flyers wouldn't be on the board of the United Way. Or it's pretty sad when Goldman Sachs has more board oversight than the Democratic Party does over its executive committee.
Right. And what's the way to reform that? Is it simply to reach those 450 people and say, you got to vote for somebody different?
No, yes. But also the recommendations that we have actually address a lot of these reforms. So this was Dr. Jim Zogby and I were on the party reform committee, and we pushed for budget transparency. And when I mean budget transparency, I don't mean a pie chart that's what they use.
Right.
They use a pie chart. They're like, oh, our budget's transparent. We spent all this money here. They don't say how much money's come in, where they're spending it, who are the consultants, are there bid contracts.
So there's just no proper oversight.
There's no oversight. It's a joke.
And if the 450 members of the DNC had the proper oversight, that they would be fixing this.
And they want it. I think that the majority of them want it. What we saw with the DNC chairs race, it was very close. Don't forget that first ballot.
Right.
Tom Perez won it by 1.5, because Democrats abroad is 1.5. 1.5 votes. And then it moved to the second ballot, and some shenanigans happened behind the scenes beyond the president calling people on the floor. There was some other stuff that happened. But that was when, the party was split then. I think that we probably have more people on our side, especially after a win like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think a lot of people are starting to see that the current model is not working. But these are like the insiders. They're still insiders.
Right.
So they're still, even though they might be moved by the people and have personal opinions about things, some of these folks are worried about making the chair upset. There's still that institutional establishment mindset. And that's what we have to overcome.
All right. Well, look, we got to take a... well, no, we don't have to take a break. Let's just go and start doing some audio. We don't have... we got some more clips here. That stuff, I think it may be dry for some folks. I think it's hugely important because your outputs, there's two things that function your outputs. That is your inputs, and which I think people are working on, and is much better. We're seeing a lot of candidates. We're seeing people come out and vote in mid-year primaries like they never have before. But if your function, that black box, is messed up, then the outputs get screwed up. And there's a lot of, we can't afford to waste energy or resources right now.
Right.
Because it's such a crap show.
And donors deserve it too. I mean, billionaire donors are one thing, but people who are giving to the Democratic Party deserve to have their money used. I mean, they're investing in the party because they want Democrats to win. And whether it's Emily's List or the DCCC or HRC, all of these groups have a responsibility to the small dollar donors just as much as the big donors.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I want my $27 back.
Bernie, I think that was a good return on investment. No.
Yeah. Okay.
DSA now has a surge, right?
Yes, it's been pretty big for us. So I'm not going to turn my nose up at it.
Well, along those lines, let's listen to Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez on Colbert talking about how, I mean, in many respects, look, I think voters are a lot more engaged, at least Democratic voters are a lot more engaged than they have been at this part of a cycle, you know, as far as I can remember, frankly. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even in 2006, much of it was literally about a scandal with a Republican congressman who was like a predator on Pages and was being covered up by the Republican leadership. But that was not the case in this election with Joe Crowley. And here's Ocasio-Cortez explaining how she had a sense that there was something going on with the electorate.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you're a very capable, intelligent person. Why do you think you were able to swing 51 points in 3 weeks and unseat this man who'd been there for 20 years?
Well, I think the first thing to kind of mention is that I don't think polling is always right.
We learned that in 2016. We learned that in 2016.
You know, polling, here's the big thing. Polling, people try to identify who is the most likely person to turn out. And what we did is that we changed who turns out. And that changes the whole electorate.
Well, who turned out? Who doesn't turn out? Who doesn't turn out, especially for Democratic primaries? And who turned out for you? Who are your constituents?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. We were about 8 minutes till the polls were closing, and I was in my home neighborhood in the Bronx, and these two young, BX, we got any BX out here? And it was 8 minutes till the polls closed, and these two like teenage-looking kids came up to me. He was like, "We just voted for you," and I was like, "How old are you?" And they're like, 19. And I was like, oh, 19 years old voting in an off-year midterm primary election?
I was watching footage of her, before the show today. And if she was, speaking of young, right? She's 28. Matt, right? She's just about your age.
I'm 29.
Well, but if she was 3 or 4 years older, I would not be shocked to have her picked as the vice presidential nominee in 2020. I would. Right now, she's literally not eligible.
Yeah.
To do that, she will not be old enough.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
She will not be old enough to do it. But the idea at age 28 that she has this poise, this savvy, and presence, I think is nuts. This was multiple things coming together, which was good politics.
Right.
Like she had a good issue set. Demographically, she reflected her district in a way that Crowley was no longer doing.
That's true, but that's not why she won. There's a lot of misinformation being set out about that, which I'll explain why that's a thing, yeah.
And 3, she's a great retail politician.
100%.
Right? But tell me demographically that she's not, give me your take on it.
Well, okay, so I live in Queens, and I'm friends with her, so full discretion, full discretion.
Disclosure.
Full discretion here. Talk about not sleeping for 3 days. So she's from the Bronx, and the Bronx, for those of you who don't know, is the Bronx and Queens are the most diverse places in the entire world.
Yes.
Number one and number two used to be Queens was, now it's the Bronx, and they've switched positions. They also have these machines, as I've mentioned, that are very, very invested in keeping the vote down. So keep that in mind.
In fact, I don't know if specifically these districts, but the pre-clearance counties, before the Supreme Court gutted our pre-clearance in the Voting Rights Act, included at least some districts in Queens and Bronx, which people don't know. They just assume it's all southern states. But Queens and Bronx were places where there was enough of a history of racial discrimination in access to the vote that they had to go through a pre-clearance process with the DOJ before the Supreme Court blew it up.
And now it's just with our voting laws.
Right.
It's with our voting laws and the machines of these counties, in the Bronx in particular. It's very complicated, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But there's an interest in keeping some people who are making a lot of money off of kind of not representing their own people, and not necessarily in office, but people who are running the machine there, consultants. So Alex, while she's Latina and while she speaks Spanish and while she's Puerto Rican and she understands and she's from the district and she really gets it, the changing demographics in the Bronx too, but in areas like Astoria, where I live, and other gentrification is not the right word for these parts because they were white, but it's like a new white,
right.
A different working class white, because that's what Crowley, why he was elected, was he had the Irish, the white voters of that generation. But these are all Bernie voters, and the Bernie voters organized and they turned out. And that's what happened in that district. If she didn't win that demo, she wouldn't have won. And so when I say the
creative class, almost like the cousin to the creative class, is that what you're saying?
I guess because it's not like they're wealthy. They're not. Right. I mean, I'm not like I'm unemployed right now, so.
But it's not. But I think the creative class was not necessarily about money as much as it was about sort of. Yes. I don't know, the philosophy. New economy or philosophy or something like that, I guess.
Yeah, and a lot of them are DSA members. There's a very strong. I was at the Queen's DSA meeting last night, and there were a lot of new members that were there. But aside from that, the reason why I mention this is because both Nancy Pelosi and Governor Cuomo were like, what happened in that district it's an anomaly, and it's because she's a Latina and she got the Latino vote. That's not why. First thing, that's not why she won. She did obviously get the Latino vote, but it was because she got this other vote, and she was talking about intersectional issues. Right. It is fantastic that she's a person of color, a woman, a millennial, a socialist, a working class person. I went to this restaurant called The Coffee Shop the other day, which is in Union Square, and I just happened to have a meeting there. And this guy heard us talking about politics, and he goes, Alex used to be a bartender here just like 5 months ago or 6 months ago. And I got chills because that person is now in Congress representing us. And she didn't get elected because she was a Latina. She got elected because of her ideas, and she was able to use those ideas that transcended the entire district. And that is the model that's going to work. I don't care what Nancy Pelosi says. It was not because she was Latina in a Latina district.
Well, all right. Let me restate what I meant by demographics. She was not an old white guy.
Right.
I mean, that's
old white guys work too. Bernie won in that district.
That's true. Fair enough.
Sorry, I don't mean to
No.
The people who voted for Bernie are such a good list to have when we're working on other campaigns because they're so receptive to it. It's awesome.
Yeah.
If the candidate delivers. I mean, if the candidate delivers on that promise.
Yeah. Also, I think you talk about intersectionality, like she's doing a really good job. Like there's been this sort of false dichotomy advanced, I think, by a lot of centrist liberals and like a few people on the left as well. That, you have to choose between class politics and identity politics. And there are people who really believe that that's going to hurt the left if we try to do both at once. And I think that's ridiculous. Like, she's made a really good connection between the two. She's been really good at that over and over. And definitely did a better job than Bernie. So good for her.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's also clearly a dynamic that's going on electorally that I think the all things being equal, the median Democratic voter is pulling the lever for women over men. I mean, I think just sort of like right now, that is, I think it is, all other things being equal, I think that appears to be a legit phenomena.
I hope so. I mean, in New York, what's fascinating is just a couple of days before this primary, and let's not forget, New York has 2 different primary dates.
It is
so confusing.
So unbelievable that I literally had a week, like 2 weeks ago, I was like, shit, man, we got to get Cynthia Nixon on before the primary. And I was like, wait a second.
I had a reporter ask me the day of the election, how do you think Cynthia is going to do? And I was like, it's June.
And that's by design.
Yes.
That's why New York has 2 counties that were in the pre-clearance provisions of the national of the Voting Rights Act, because it's effed up here.
But think about this. Just a couple of days before the election, there was, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but there were a bunch of hit pieces on groups like Our Revolution and these activist groups who haven't been able to deliver. They haven't won the majority of their elections. I'm sorry, let's just look at the DNC for a second and Emily's list and DCCC. Like, have they won the majority of their elections? But there's another standard for the new organization run by Nina Turner, who's an outspoken reformer. Okay. But with that being said, Emily's list did not endorse any of the women that ran except for literally the day before, Luba Gretchen Shirley in Long Island. And all 3 of those women that ran, one who had to literally run against the establishment, the DCCC, like recruited somebody, all 3 of the Our Revolution women won. Big time. And they weren't expected to. So something's going on. First thing, I always think that on the front lines of the revolution, there are women. And they never get the attention, and if so, they get smeared like Nina Turner gets smeared, or Susan Sarandon or Rosario Dawson was during the campaign, and so many of our other sisters, they're not the same as the chosen ones, I guess. So I think this is extraordinary, and in a place like New York, where like you could not run in a more difficult state, and they won against the establishment, that means a lot.
Well, on some level, I'm sorry. Let me just add that the bars, and there's, I don't know, there's an analogy in terms of like, what's happened with the gerrymandering, right? Like if the Democrats get above a certain amount, then everything just falls apart for the Republicans. But that threshold is higher because of the gerrymandering. But in this instance, there's also the difficulty involved in voting generally favors the incumbent because there's a sort of a baseline disinterest. In this instance, the depth of support, not just the scope of it, not how many people, but how deep that support runs, like what an average supporter was willing to do relative to an average supporter in any other year, was so much greater that became an advantage for candidates like this. But the Emily's List thing too, I would just add, is like back in the day, Jane Hampshire over Fire Dog Lake, I'm going way back now, would describe some of these groups as being in the veal pen. That they would, that there are some groups who go in and they just basically go in and they're there, they fatten themselves up, and it is really more about maintaining access and power within Washington, so that they lose sight of their original mission. And on some levels, I think there's like criticism of Emily's List that I think is legit in that regard, in a big, big way.
I mean, when organizations don't support you because you're not viable, and viability, the definition of viability is, can you raise $250,000 in 2 months? And by the way, in some cases, these candidates did. And that's when you're like, okay, so it's not even this bullshit excuse of having to raise, hundreds of thousands of dollars right away to get your endorsement, early money. Then you actually do, based off of grassroots donations, and you're not supporting this candidate. What's the real shtick here? Is it just because, they're talking about economics, that's why?
But do you think that there is a mechanism in which viability can be measured by outside groups in an effective long-term way, or as opposed to like, look, what we're going to do is we're just not going to get involved in primaries? I
think it's the worst idea
to not get involved in primaries. So how does an outside group that is based in Washington, raising their money, how do they assess a race in, let's say, take for instance the 19th, okay? where I have spent the better part of the past 10, 15 years. No idea. I had no idea. Look at that field. I had no idea who was the most likely. I mean, I got a sense of what politics I liked of an individual, but I had no sense of which one of these people could actually win the district. Now, the turnout was twice or than it was the primary with Zephyr Teachout and Will Yandick. Now, you have 4 times the amount of candidates practically, but there's obviously a lot of enthusiasm on the Democratic side. So maybe you don't have. Maybe there was 4 people in that race who could win, but I don't have a sense of who would be the best candidate. If I had to go in there and give money to, I wouldn't know who to pick if I wanted a win out of that district.
I don't think you get involved in every primary. In full disclosure, I do work with Our Revolution. But the model of Our Revolution is, it's evolving, right?
Right.
They have a board. All organizations evolve, but they're based off of. They take their recommendations from the local groups, and the local groups. I mean, this is what the Democratic Party should be doing, right?
Right.
They should be listening to the local chapters. I was actually a little surprised that Our Revolution endorsed Alex nationally because a lot of the other chapters around the area hadn't. But there was one chapter, which Bronx Progressives, which is an Our Revolution affiliate, which stepped up and said, we have to support her. And they took the recommendation from Bronx Progressive because they're in the district, they were involved, they were volunteering, they had the feel of what was happening on the ground. But it was a risk because Our Revolution is also challenging Governor Cuomo. And, sometimes you have to sit there and say to yourself,
is it worth expending our political capital on this congressional race against somebody in the leadership, or do we want to save our powder for the big fight against Cuomo?
And you know what?
It worked out.
It worked out.
Right. Doubled down and worked out.
Oh, my God. I was shocked. Yeah.
All right. Do we have a Jimmy Reefer Cake song?
Oh, my God. The excitement.
Did he write one for Nomi?
I don't know that he wrote one for Nomi. I don't think he knew that Nomi was going to be on. But,
you guys didn't promote me.
We better get him on that for next time.
Jimmy Reefer Cake needs to do a Nomiki Konst theme song. Did you find it? You find it? I actually remember now. I did see it earlier. Now, Jimmy Reefer Cake most weeks writes a song that reflects the week in news, and also reflects his desire for marijuana to be decriminalized across the country. And he's actually had a tremendous amount of success. I don't know if it's because of the show, but he's been doing this for about 6 years. And marijuana has become significantly more legalized across the country.
Coincidence? I think not.
Right. And so this week's, do you have this week's? Now, we should also tell you that he has been on a Doors parody kick. So this week is...
it's called DA Woman.
Yes. So based on...
That's
LA
oh my
Woman.
God.
Here we go. DA Woman.
Yeah, all right. All right. Kamala tweeted out about an hour ago. She took a look around, see which way the wind blow.
Oh, my God.
She said to legalize weed at the federal level. Are you the lucky little lady gonna legalize? Or just another lost bill? I didn't legalize it. Legalize it. Legalize it. Legalize it. Oh, come on. DA woman. DA woman. Getting high on Sunday afternoon.
On Sunday afternoon.
Driving through your suburbs. Safer than booze. It's safer than booze. Yeah, telling the truth. It's just safer than booze. Oh yeah, I see your weed is burning. Bongs are filled with fire. say that reefer is bad.
He's already laughing.
You know they are a liar. Driving down your freeways,
Hey, you may have
totally fucking stoned. Yeah, alright. Drunks in cars, coming home from bars. Designated driver should be totally stoned. I say let him be totally
All right.
stoned. Not drunk.
That's brilliant.
There we go. I assume he's talking. DA woman is Kamala Harris, right? I mean, that's. There you go. DA woman by Jimmy Reefer.
We need a box set of the Doors covers, I think.
Yeah, we could put that out. I mean, of course, I'm sure Jimmy's selling it on allthehypocrisy.com, where you can go to get more of that. All right.
Once again, definitely an improvement over the original.
Folks, just a reminder, you can support this program by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com, jointhemajorityreport.com. Every day we give you free content. You can support that by becoming a member, and to say thank you, we give you more content. And if you're one of those people who can't afford to become a member, but you want the extra content, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Wait for 10 days while we catch up on our emails, and then we will hook you up. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use your coupon code majority, get 10% off. We're going to head into the fun half. Before we do, don't forget the Antifada, Jamie's co-hosted podcast.
Yeah, so we finally dropped this amazing crossover episode with Brett from Revolutionary Left Radio. It was also our anniversary that day, me and Sean, my co-host.
How long have you guys been married?
We have been married for a year. We've been together for 8 years.
Seriously?
Wow.
Just a year?
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Very exciting. What do you do on your first? Was that like a silver, a gold, a paper, a...
It is a record a podcast anniversary for us, I guess, because that's what we did. And
Well, there
it
you
was
go. It's very romantic.
It was very romantic. And we also talked with Brett about, because he's a dad, we talked about how his parenthood has affected his politics and his political philosophy, and kind of brought a tear to my eye.
Right, because isn't one of the underlying themes of Antifada Sean trying to convince you to start a family?
It is indeed.
And where are you with that right now?
Maybe he needs to bring on a few more prominent leftists and we'll talk.
Wow, I don't even know what that. I have to diagram that.
We talked to Doug Henwood and Liza Featherstone about having kids. They've got a kid.
And what is the general consensus? Would you say on the left in terms of having kids?
I mean, we do need to build an army of red diaper babies, so that's like a pro. And also, it kind of lights a fire under your ass, because once you have kids, you're like, oh shit, the world is fucked. I need to do something about this, which sounds like equal parts inspiring and terrifying to me. So I'm still like kind of on the fence.
Yes, I can attest.
Can I share a personal story real quick? Because I'm very conflicted about this response. I went on a date like a couple of days ago, and for some reason we got a conversation about kids, not like, our future.
Well, that is quite a date.
It was a very, very intense thing.
This is the first date.
Yeah, but both of us were like, why the fuck would we bring kids into this world? It's actually on fire. Like, it's actually, there are parts that are exploding. And who's going to survive? It's going to be like the Trump Aryan race. So not our kids.
I find it somewhat a concern. I mean, but I don't know. Well, I'm not going to tell my Ambien story again. But patreon.com/the Antifada, or of course iTunes.
I need to listen to this now.
Hell yeah. Wherever free podcasts are sold.
And
You can give us money if you want to.
Do you take Bitcoin? I'm kidding. I hate Bitcoin. I hate them.
Oh my.
and Literary Hangover.
Yep, patreon.com/literary hangover. Also, check it out on YouTube. The episodes are going up there, and there might be some, I think we're going to record some bonus content for the Patreon members maybe this afternoon, so hopefully it'll be up this weekend.
Ooh.
But Sleepy Hollow coming out next Saturday.
Oh,
Sleepy Hollow.
wow.
Do you want to explain what the podcast is?
Yeah,
Just
for
so that-
anybody who hasn't heard, it's we read fiction. It's sort of a book club podcast, but with an extra eye on sort of history and politics. That sort of went into the formation of the book and how it was received and that sort of thing.
Love that.
There you go.
I don't know if I ever read Sleepy Hollow. I don't know if I read it or I cliff noted or I just lied on my
It's one of those
exams.
stories that sort of permeated the culture so much that you've probably picked up most of the elements.
Okay, that's probably it.
Oh,
never actually read the
I
book.
just saw that Alex. Oh my gosh!
What?
Whoa!
What
Oh,
happened?
let's put this up. Wow. So, Infowars.com.
Oh my God.
There you go.
Wait, can I take a picture of this and just...
Well, it's on.
it's on Twitter.
Oh my God.
Infowars.com has a new foil apparently. Meet the face of tyranny and suffering. This is it's pretty funny.
But that's concerning because Infowars is dangerous. And
Yes, that's true.
She's a very accessible, yeah. I'm actually concerned about this, especially in light of what happened yesterday.
If you think Venezuela is awesome, you'll love Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Believes in flooding America with illegals who vote, overthrowing the Constitution,
Oh my God, this is so horrible.
disarming all citizens, never ending government handouts for all. I
Well,
wonder if
that's
that's like
true.
talking about flyers. Class tribal warfare against whites, government-run third world health care. She should really go out there and promote the best health care, not third world health care. I think it's probably
Government monopoly.
government monopoly over education. I would say probably the government has a monopoly over education already. Right? on some level, it's not. It's not. I don't know if you would run an antitrust case against the government in terms of monopoly, but okay.
I certainly
Hedge
wouldn't.
funds?
Weakening police while gangs run rampant.
Gangs. Yeah.
And then, of course, the results, mass starvation, total brainwashing of children. If you're going to brainwash children, folks, do it totally. Don't do it partially away. It just confuses them. The collapse of individual liberty, government genocide. There you go.
She
Wow.
could, I wonder if she could do something. She's not in office yet, and she is a public figure, but I wonder if there's some way she can go after him legally.
She's a public figure.
Well, that doesn't mean you're cleared. Defamation. There are actual effects. If this has some sort of maybe there's legal experts here, but defamation isn't just extinguished because you're a
That's
public
true.
figure.
That's true. You would have to prove that when they say that she believes in
Right.
flooding America with that they know that she's not. The bar would be like. You would have to prove that that she's not believing in overthrowing the Constitution.
Class tribal warfare against whites. I know that she's not.
That's probably.
I think that's provable. Listen, she won the whites.
She won the whites.
white
She's
vote.
just
She
going
won
to
the
use
whites,
them
folks.
to bludgeon the other whites. That's what she's going to do it. All right. We're going to take a break, head into the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number. We'll take your phone calls. We'll take your IMs. We're still working on the app. Google had some issue with our app, so it's available if you have the
Our
app.
ideas are being suppressed by the tech companies.
Totally. We've been deplatformed. But
Yet Alex Jones is fine.
majorityapp.com. We'll be right back after this.
C'est une poupée qui fait non. C'est une poupée qui fait non. Toute la journée, elle fait non. C'est une poupée qui fait non. Toute la journée, elle fait non. C'est une poupée qui fait non, 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 non. Toute la journée, elle fait non, 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 non. Elle est tellement jolie que j'en
What's that? Oh, we're back. We are back. It is the fun half, folks, wherein we have fun. And just a reminder, our government kidnapped over 2,000 children and has not returned them to their parents. And
Just a reminder.
yeah, just a brief reminder. I understand it's uncivil for me to say that, but I don't know, like this whole notion of calling them child separation. I suppose if you were a kidnapper, you could say, like, I did not kidnap the child. I just separated them from their parents. But that is what we did. We kidnapped these children.
And then we kidnapped their parents, too, and sent them somewhere else.
I mean, at the very least, we put them in jail prior to a misdemeanor trial, which if everyone who was subject to a misdemeanor went to jail in this country, you talk about criminal reform, criminal justice reform, overnight, it would have happened. And then what happens is they're sending kids, little kids. Here's a picture, and this is a clip. There's been a report out by the State Department of the United States saying children separated from family face a higher risk of trafficking, which is obvious, right? Once you put them in the system and you start flying them around the country in the middle of the night, and they end up in foster care or at Christian adoption agencies, it's much harder to keep track of the children.
Yeah.
Here is a clip from found on Twitter from Ronald Reagan, a friend of show, of a immigration attorney, Amy Maldonado, who basically did, and this is happening. There are reports of 4 and 5-year-olds being brought into trial. They don't have their kids. They're basically, they're hearing the asylum cases of these kids. And they're asking them questions. Here, Amy Maldonado reenacts a detained child court hearing with her own kid, I guess.
Hello. What is your name?
Evan.
Can you please say your whole name for the record?
I don't know what it is.
Okay. Is either of your parents U.S. citizens?
Yeah.
Is your mom a U.S. citizen?
Yeah.
And what about your dad?
Yeah.
What is your mom's name?
Mommy.
And what is your dad's name?
Daddy.
Okay. And what relief will you be applying today from removal?
God.
God?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Do you have an application to file with the court?
Yeah.
Can I have it?
Yeah.
Where is it? Okay. And would you like to designate a country of removal should that become necessary?
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
What is that?
It's a sword.
You can't have weapons in the court. Could I have that weapon?
Yeah. No.
No? Okay, so what country would you like to designate for removal? Do you know?
Yeah.
What country are you from? What country are you from, sir? Do you know?
Yeah.
Okay, what country is it? Do you know?
Yeah.
Can you tell me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, super cute, but also this is going on. It is so effed up. And the idea that like there was a moment spent on, where Sarah Sanders eats her dinner,
Right.
is just it's grotesque. It's unbelievable. Again, tomorrow, familiesbelongtogether.org, you can find out more about protests that are taking place all around the country. I mean, there's a lot of places to protest. In New York, I think people are meeting at Foley Square and then marching over the bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah, today.
Today at 4, right?
Wait, today?
Yes.
No,
yeah,
tomorrow.
There's
at
one
10 a.m.
There's one today and one tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I'll do today too. There was a big protest in D.C. I think almost exclusively women. I'm not sure, but over 550 people were arrested on the steps of Capitol Hill. The protesters wore those same space blankets that the children have been given when they come into these little baby jails that they're being put into. Here is video of 575 people protesting, and they were all arrested at the Capitol. That's a lot of people to be arrested. Pretty impressive. And I don't know, the idea that like, don't keep Sarah Sanders from getting into a restaurant. It's going to motivate the Republican base. I'm sorry. I don't think so. Here's more footage of people getting arrested in the, and is this in the actual Capitol building? It looks like it's,
Oh, they actually cuffed her. They didn't do the.
yeah, they didn't do the
thing.
plastic things. This is full on cuffs for some of these people.
Kirsten Gillibrand, who didn't support.
What's that?
Kirsten Gillibrand, who.
Right. Blumenthal's there.
My mom's old boss.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
There you go. More footage. There's going to be a lot more of that, obviously, this weekend. And then I think we're going to see a lot more of this as we get into the process of picking a new Supreme Court justice. Yeah.
Do you know what groups put on that protest?
I'm not sure, actually, who organized that. Do you know, Brendan?
People that were there.
I know, yeah, Pramila Jayapal was there.
Camilla, Linda Sarsour, I believe, was there.
I don't know what the organization is that did it. Women's March organization.
It was Women's March.
It's been pretty inspiring, I gotta say, to see the way the whole left, from liberals to leftists, are organizing around this issue, each in their own way. Like, we saw a lot of the occupations were done in coalition by various leftist groups, ISO, DSA, MAC, and we're also seeing liberals, and that's great.
Yep.
We need more of.
What's the immigrant voices? What's the immigrant rights group? I can't remember. They were there too. You know what I'm thinking of? I'll look it up.
Definitely don't wag the finger at people for disrupting someone's dinner by reminding them that they're ruining people's lives.
I can't emphasize that enough. And if you have the opportunity out there to ruin the dinner of anyone who works in the Trump administration, by all means, do so. And
I was on this show right before I came on Bold TV.
Yeah, what is Bold TV? What is that? I've never heard of that.
It's
Is it bold?
It's bold in some ways, I guess. Depends on how you look at bold. What's your definition of bold? Carrie Sheffield, she's wonderful. She's a very nice person. She's a
Never Trumper.
She was a never Trumper. Now she supports Trump, which confused me today.
What?
Yeah. She's like a
What changed
Koch
her
brother.
mind?
Follow the Kochs. That's what I think. I think she's an always Coker.
You gotta be kidding me. How does someone go from being a never Trumper? I mean, almost definitionally, it seems like it would be a little bit tricky to go like, well, now,
Tax plan.
I never before. But is that
It's a tax bill.
It's unbelievable.
That was it. She had this person on, and she's very civil, and she's all about civil discourse. And
Of course she is.
Of course, right? And she goes, I can't believe it. Someone called me a racist. And I go, well, you're a capitalist. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, well, all right. Do you think that your economic policies hurt certain people? And she's like, no, it's, I think that everybody has a right to whatever bullshit that they say. And I said, well, the problem is that your entire system is based on inequity, and who does that affect? And I don't have to convince you guys how this works. But she had this woman on, Joy Villa, the woman who was at the Grammys and wore that Trump dress. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh my God, I'm so out of it. I don't know Bold TV. I don't know Carrie Sheffield. I don't know.
Because you live in your little liberal echo chamber,
It's
as she
true.
would say.
I don't even live.
Snowflake.
I don't even live in an echo chamber. I live in my own little liberal sound booth. Essentially, is what it is.
That's actually it. And you welcome whoever you like in. So this woman, Joy Villa, was on, and we had this conversation about whether or not the same. Yes, like should you call somebody out? Should somebody spit in their face? I said, I'm sorry. You have people actually being lynched right now. Like there are reports of lynchings, and you're saying that's equal to somebody who spit in the face of, frankly, they deserved it. Like,
Right.
I'm sorry.
Who got their face spit in?
I don't know. Was it the DHS secretary? She got spit on?
Oh yeah, no, she definitely did.
I hope so.
This
Spit
woman,
on face,
this one.
without a doubt.
Oh, jeez. Who the fuck is this?
She's some singer.
What's in her hand?
A box of golden chocolates.
Some secret
know.
potion or something.
That is weird.
But what? I mean,
Why?
why?
Cha-ching.
Money.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's basically it.
Money, craziness.
And so, like, who's watching Bold TV now? How do you watch if how do you watch a never Trumper and then just watch how they become not a never Trumper based upon, like, what was the basis of her being a never Trumper in the first place?
I missed the entire. I acknowledged her today. I said, I don't understand. I thought you were a never Trumper. And she's like, I'm a Trump supporter, she said to one of the guests. And I just said, whoa, when did that happen? I don't know. I mean, I've known her from TV. Like, she goes on MSNBC, she goes on CNN, and that's how we know each other, from debating each other. And she does have bipartisan, like Clay Aiken co-hosts this with her usually. And so I filled in today. But it was painful.
It's hard, man.
He's from what?
Oh, you don't know who the Clay Aiken is?
And he's
It was when American Idol.
He ran for Congress as an
He ran, but he didn't win. Right?
What? God, I'm at.
Well, it was a few
need to
years ago.
Stay
Wasn't
up
this
to date
year?
on this.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a lot of experience as member of the far left, dealing with people who don't necessarily share my views. But this feels pretty different. Like, I don't even want to fucking look at anyone who supports Trump at this point in time.
I was at the coffee shop the other day. Back to the coffee shop.
Oh God, you spend a lot of time.
Another.
At the
No,
goddamn
it was the
coffee
same
shop.
time. So I'm sitting in the booth, and there are these 6 white bros behind us. They were so rude. They're moving the booth, and they elbowed me in the neck. And we turn around, and we start talking to them. They're Trumpers, and they're the most outrageous Trump supporters in the middle. And they're so loud, and they're like, well, there's Trump people all over New York. You just don't know about it. They're not from New York, but.
Right.
Yeah, it was very vociferous about their Trump support, and the entire coffee shop just turned against them.
I'm glad
ran them out,
I would love
basically.
to see.
I will say, based on some insider knowledge, I won't say how I got it. There are a lot of alt-right dudes in New York City, even in my very neighborhood. So,
Where's your neighborhood? Staten
Bushwick.
Island.
Bushwick.
I think they're all in
Bushwick, for
Staten
Christ's
Island,
sake.
or they're like Milo Yiannopoulos, who's just making a lot of money.
Or
That's
they
right.
like worked for Vice for a little bit.
That's true too.
Just because someone
Let's-
looks like a hipster doesn't mean that they're necessarily a liberal.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. I'm glad to hear from you. Now, I should just tell Nomi that John from San Antonio is a big proponent of Our Voices, but Our Revolution. But I suspect that he may also have some critique. Is that right, John?
No, not too much critique today. Just
Okay.
mostly talking about the wins on Tuesday.
All right. Well, let's hear your take.
Okay, yeah, excellent interviews with Ian Millhauser and Jane McAlevey yesterday, and also with Nomiki Konst today.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I know I'm a little late to the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez victory party. I had commitments that kept me from calling in the last couple of days.
I was
had a
wondering.
2.5
That's,
page.
that's okay.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, I had 2.5 pages of notes prepared for Tuesday, but I understand, family comes first.
Yes.
So I've watched almost all of her interviews post-election, and I agree with your analysis that she is an exceptional political force. She combines all the great issue sets which she shares with Bernie and all the other Our Revolution and Justice Democrats, also with the stunning charisma, and she's a brilliant communicator. It was great to see you put up your highest live numbers on YouTube the day afterwards, so that was great to see.
Oh, all right. Thank
so
you. I wasn't aware of that, but
so
I appreciate
it. Hopefully Schumer will be booted from his leadership position before 2022, but regardless of that, whether he's in leadership or not, I'd absolutely love to see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez take on Schumer in 2022. So, yeah, Tuesday was definitely the greatest night for progressives in the primary season. In the 24th District of New York, Our Revolution and Working Families endorsed Dana Balter, beat DCCC endorsed Juanita Perez-Williams by 25 points. I was concerned about this race because a Siena poll had Perez-Williams up by 13 points. Taibbi talked about this race 9 days ago. Balter got in early and established herself as the front runner of the DCCC. Traditional pundits were concerned about running a strong progressive, so they endorsed Perez-Williams. It's got in at the last minute, but Balter, ended up winning the race, and she's going to face incumbent Republican John Katko. Clinton won this district by 3 points, and a generic Democrat had a 4-point lead in December at the height of the Democrats leading in the generic ballot. All 5 of the top aggregators rate this race as likely Republican, which connotes a 6 to 9 point Republican victory. I think that traditional aggregators are underestimating Balter and Kara Eastman's chances in these races. Most people will vote for the Democrats regardless of whether they're progressive or centrist. And also in the second race, the 2nd District of New York, Our Revolution endorsed Laubia Shirley. Now says she'll face veteran xenophobe and Trump supporter Peter King. Trump only won
Can I
this
add one
district.
part? Michael Bloomberg,
Yeah.
Mr. I'm investing in Democrats, is now going to campaign for Pete King.
Oh, really?
Oh, my God. Yeah, isn't that a contradiction? Didn't he give a bunch of money for Democrats?
And he's supposed to run for
Yeah,
president
what
as a
a-
Democrat.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, it's nice to have that. Like, it's good to sort of like have something to point to when people start talking about Michael Bloomberg. It's at least more of that actually would be welcome.
It's a good shorthand.
What else
Did
do
you
you have,
guys-
John? What else? What else do you have, John?
Okay, yeah. So considering the average tilt in the federal special elections has been 15 points based on the Trump-Clinton metric. This could be a winnable district considering Trump only won this district by 9 points. And Our Revolution and Justice Democrats endorsed Ben Jealous, beat establishment Democrat Laverne Baker. Polling
sure.
showed the pure toss-up race, yet Jealous won by 10 points, and Jealous is one of the best Bernie surrogates and did a fantastic job as the leader of the
John, what do you think the
NAACP.
chances are of Jealous beating Hogan?
Well, in a hypothetical, Hogan was up by 17 points, but I think it's really if they can just tie Hogan to Trump and to establishment Republicans, I think he could win it. I mean, I don't understand why Baker in Massachusetts and it's in Sununu in New Hampshire are all doing so well, in their approval rating. It kind of defies
Massachusetts
the odds
has
on
always
that.
had we've always had a thing there for sort of I don't want to even say moderate Republicans. I mean, Baker's even more moderate than what a moderate Republican would look like today. But Bill Weld used to go to Dead shows, and so everybody get all excited about that.
Yeah, I
New Hampshire
don't
doesn't make any
understand it, but it's that. But I mean, Ben Jealous is a great candidate. I mean, I could see him as a potential presidential candidate in 10 or 15 years, or one of the leadership in the Senate. I mean, he's really that good. And a lot of mainstream journalists have been talking about how the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won in the big city, but is that going to play in the Midwest? And I just want to remind people that Bernie won a majority of states in the Midwest. When I've gone over some recent polls that aren't on the coast, Richard Ojeda leading Republican Carol Miller in the 3rd District of West Virginia by 6 points is a district that Trump won by 49 points. In Montana at-large congressional district race, Democrat Kathleen Williams leads a convicted assaulter Greg Gianforte by 6 points.
Oh,
In
remember him?
February, our Revolution and Justice Democrats endorsed Bruce Welder is up by 7 points over incumbent Republican Kevin Yoder. Welder is also a little bit below in fundraising, so hopefully he'll win his primary on the 7th. I believe it's on the 7th.
Please.
So
Yes.
one thing that I had a reporter asked me this right after Alex's race. The same question you said, is this going to work in the heartland? I think what we have to keep in mind here is that in the heartland, there are the traditional Democratic Party, like the DCCC, is doubling down in these like red to blue districts and keeping the conservative candidate, whereas in Crowley's race they just ignored it. And then that's where a leftist can come in and take the district over. But there are real battles in these districts, and sometimes it works and Balter wins, and sometimes it doesn't. But that's where like the real infighting is happening, and there's a lot of money going into keeping the more conservative candidate, which frankly I don't think is going to win the general election against Republicans. But that's where that heart of that fight is happening, and it's not like can a leftist win? It's can a leftist beat the centrist?
Right.
And
right.
then run.
Right. I mean, is there? Well, I think the argument is these politics are all well and good for, and I sort of feel like they desperately want to say Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Even though it's Queens and the Bronx, but I feel like they desperately want to say Brooklyn. But these politics are all well and good for the Queens and the Bronx. But it's just America's going to recoil at the notion of Medicare for all or higher education that's available to all their kids. America's just going to look at this and just say, like, what? Are you kidding? Yeah. Housing as a right. I mean, that's the thing, is that you would think, right? Like a good organization would say, we should just test out one place. Like, let's find 2 or 3 races that we're just going to back the leftists just to see, is like a what do you call it? Proof of
concept.
Proof of concept. Let's just try it out. Like, this is we're not going to drop in all the money. We're gonna we'll do a mid to low level drop of cash and just see what happens there, because these are more or less written off anyways. That's what like a smart strategy would be, even if you had that legitimate reluctance and belief that we need to have somebody who's more of a, like a soft conservative.
But how do you balance that with all that pharmaceutical money? And I mean, that's ultimately.
Like when you hear about there's districts Hillary won that the Dems didn't even have a challenger in, it takes it harder to like It's harder to take seriously the idea that, oh no, we can't risk
Right.
these other candidates.
That would be a good faith strategy, though, for sure.
Definitely. John, get on that.
All right.
All right.
All right. So, okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Sam. Take
Thanks,
care.
John.
Thanks,
Bye.
John.
Did you guys see that editorial about how the Democratic Party needs to decide if it's the party of Mike Bloomberg or
Oh my God, stop.
Ocasio-Cortez?
And they came up with Mike Bloomberg.
They did. They came down
Who
on the
wrote
side of
that,
Bloomberg.
though? Who wrote that?
Daniela Greenbaum at Business Insider.
Business Insider.
Negative shout outs to her.
You know what? You know who I go to for my electoral strategy?
Right.
Daniela Greenbaum.
Right. From the Democratic Party.
Yes.
Business Insider, always a great bastion.
He's not even a Democrat.
But I actually think that.
Thank you.
I think the question is correct. I just think the answer's wrong.
Yeah,
Right? I mean, like,
exactly.
I think that is. I think the question is correct. I hate to go all Dave Rubin on this, but he was tweeting out the other day like, sensible Democrats are going to leave the party, and I'm like, and where are they going to go? Like, where is the Democrats who want Bill Weld? Where are they going to go? They're going to stay in the Democratic Party.
I guess it remains to be seen whether they care about beating Trump enough that they're willing to, I don't want to say bend the knee, but do what's right.
Yeah, these pieces are highly predictable. Democrats are in danger of going too far left for 2018. Highly predictable because, first of all, it takes you 5 minutes to write this piece. Like literally, it's just, you got to do a piece every day. Shit, I'll just write this thing. I mean,
Guess where the writer of this piece is managing editor for? Which publication?
Joe Cunningham? National Review. I don't know.
Close. Red State.
Red State.
oh, there you go. All right. Well, appreciate the advice, buddy.
Thanks, Red State.
I mean, it is a real question, right? Because that is something that centrist liberals used to get the left in line the last time around and get everyone to vote for Hillary. Like beating Trump is the most important thing right now, which I agree with. So like, it'd be interesting to see, and maybe Nomi has a take on it, like if the Democratic Party does nominate like a Bernie style candidate, if they're going to practice what they preach or if they're going to find a Mike Bloomberg to run as an independent.
Oh, you mean after the nomination?
Yeah.
I think Mike Bloomberg will just do it.
Yeah.
So like the reality here is when Joe Cunningham is giving Democrats advice, that is just, come on. These
But that's
people in the
classic
Senate-
concern trolling, right?
It's concern trolling, but it's also, there are a lot of Republicans who are like what Steve Schmidt. I mean, these people are leaving the party because they feel disconnected. And then they see that Bloomberg's coming in to save the day or whatever it is of the Democrats. The Democrats are pro-business. Like, it's just what it is. The people who control the Democratic Party have pro-business, pro-APAC. And centrist Republicans are the same. I don't have to tell you guys this. We know it. They're going to do whatever it takes to keep that moderate force. And that's what this is all about. It's
course.
It's literally all it's about.
Even if it means jeopardizing the election and maybe losing to Trump.
Well, are these people going to run Michael Bloomberg, you mean?
Or a Bloomberg candidate, or just like
Not under the. I don't think. I don't think Bloomberg would run as a Democrat. I don't think that can happen.
Do you think that the centrist faction would either explicitly break off or just not support strongly a Bernie-style candidate against Trump?
I will say this. I think in 2016, you would have seen more defections from the Democratic ticket if Bernie had been president, the nominee, than you did with Clinton. In
No, I think
defections,
they're fall in line Democrats. Those people would fall in line because he'd be repackaged as the guy.
maybe. I think there was. My sense was that there was a lot of people who would have. I mean, I actually think that Bloomberg would have run if Bernie had been the nominee, and that would have been
Catastrophe.
Bloomberg would have won.
Well, no, but Bloomberg would have.
Just kidding.
He would have been the spoiler. Then we could have beat up on.
He would have been the spoiler, right? Yeah. Then you would
Well,
hear.
he thought about it, and he actually said, "I don't want to be the spoiler." He literally said that when it happened. And if you recall, he was the DNC.
Well, wait a second.
Yes.
I never heard him say he wouldn't do it until it was clear that Clinton was going to be the nominee.
Exactly.
I think that he was prepared to run.
Totally.
If Bernie was a
He
nominee.
had a team. That's what I'm saying.
He has one now too. I know he's out there polling.
He's delusional. I mean,
Totally delusional, but
this is a guy
he
who-
wouldn't be the first delusional billionaire.
Sure.
You know.
but he's not. I understand that, but he doesn't speak to a base. His base is billionaires, and like we know that the billionaires are not. And
He has
nobody's
no constituency.
No constituency.
They all
whatsoever.
fit into Joe Scarborough's studio every day.
Right.
That's basically it.
But would a substantial faction of the Democratic Party break off and support a candidate like that, do you think, if the Democratic nominee were too far to the left for them?
I think that there's signaling that happens just like it does on the left, which is great for us, right? But like if Hillary comes out and says, then they're going to get like the Hillary people, I think it would be a big problem, and it would deliver us Trump, obviously, once more. But they can't win with just those folks.
Right.
Unless he says, I'm going to run with Kamala Harris as an independent, and they're killing the Democrat. No, it's just not like, it's not going to happen. At the DNC, when he spoke, we were in the New York delegation in the front. Almost the entire New York delegation, with exception to some, more operative-y types, was sitting when he spoke.
Right.
And they were shouting, we all were shouting, Mayor 1%. We were so angry. The New Yorkers were so angry about him being on stage, not a Democrat. Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean,
I can tell you right now that Donald Trump is not a real billionaire.
the
And
left
he can't win because of it.
I can't believe that was the messaging.
That was it.
Yep. We ate a lot of shit the last time around. I mean, I had a revolutionary Maoist on my show last weekend who voted for Hillary because he understood Trump was the greater threat. So I just hope that.
Well, those Maoists, they understand the way they understand the way the power must be wielded.
Certainly, but not just the base, but
Workers'
the folks
that
in
actually
power.
is very pro-Hillary, workers' camps.
I hope they return the favor.
Sorry.
Speaking of power, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you now. There's two things that are going on with Jordan Peterson today, right?
Oh God.
Apparently, Jordan Peterson is enraged that someone in a New York Times op-ed, a man named Brian W. Van Norden, who is a professor of philosophy, wrote a piece that that said that Jordan Peterson has complained that men, quote, can't control crazy women because men, quote, have absolutely no respect for someone they cannot physically fight. And then Jordan Peterson was outraged. I'm going to read his tweet in response to this. Jordan Peterson wrote, first, I said nothing of the sort. Quote, Peterson, a professor of psychology at University of Toronto, has complained that men can't control crazy women because men have absolutely no respect for someone they cannot physically fight. And then Peterson quote tweeted his own tweet. We are truly at the point where the former newspaper of record, this is the New York Times, will publish outright falsehoods with no compunction whatsoever. Not good. Not good.
Not good.
Bad. Well, look, this is one of those he said situations because we don't have a videotape that would show whether or not Jordan Peterson said anything of this. Oh, wait a second. Yes, we do.
This is something my wife has pointed out too. She said, well, men are going to have to stand up for themselves. But here's the problem. I know how to stand up to a man who's unfairly trespassing against me. And the reason I know that is because the parameters for my resistance are quite well defined, which is we talk, we argue, we push, and then it becomes physical, right? Like if we move beyond the boundaries of civil discourse, we know what the next step is. Okay, that's forbidden in discourse with women. Right. And so I don't think that men can control crazy women. I really don't believe it. I think that they have to throw their hands up in it's not even disbelief.
Pause it. I'm sorry. Did he just say that men can't control crazy women because it's forbidden for them to move into the physical part of this? I also question, really, is he prepared to fight like that? Because,
I would love to meet him and debate him.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
serious.
I
It
would
would
too.
be... I would like to meet
I'm
him,
a
crazy
and I would
woman.
like to be, yeah. See,
I was
'cause he
literally
wouldn't
called crazy yesterday at the bar, and I was like, this guy goes, oh, you're just that crazy person. I was like, oh, we want to go there now. So it's very triggering. It's a very triggering thing for
I
women.
would like to bump into him and then just get into a fight. And I'll tell you the way it would go with me. It would be we meet, we argue. I make fun of his two-tone hair dye job, and then we fight. That's the way that it would go with
hair
me.
dye, really?
It's a natural hierarchy. Of
Well,
things.
that's the
Also, I got news for him. Men do beat up women.
Yeah.
that's the other thing that apparently he's not aware of. But let's listen to it because I want to be fair to Jordan Peterson. It's not just, this clip is not just about him clearly saying what he claims he did not say. It's also about the other bat crap, crazy stuff he's saying.
Belief. It's that there's no step forward that you can take under those circumstances, because if the man is offensive enough and crazy enough, the reaction becomes physical right away, or at least the threat is there. And when men are talking to each other in any serious manner, that underlying threat of physicality is always there, especially if it's a real conversation, and it keeps the thing civilized to some degree. You know, if you're talking to a man who...
Pause it. Now, the implication here is that women do not feel the underlying physical threat that men pose to them. I mean, just completely oblivious of that notion. That's
You're right. That's it.
right. Like women never feel that.
It also proves, I mean, he's proving something for us, which is that we're just much more effective communicators because we don't get violent.
Well, that's a problem because then it doesn't keep it civilized in a box. The threat without the threat of violence.
That allows
Right.
crazy
What-
women to just go off. as
Yeah,
we're gonna
exactly.
find
That's
out.
You're just screaming all the time without punching me.
Well, this is actually
really crazy.
This is actually part of the threat to the whole society, I mean, as he goes on to explain, because the crazy women are running around everywhere.
who wouldn't fight with you under any circumstances whatsoever, then you're talking to someone to whom you have absolutely no respect. But I can't see any way. For example, there's a woman in Toronto who's been organizing this movement, let's say, against me and some other people who are going to do a free speech event, and she managed to organize quite effectively. And she's quite offensive, you might say. She compared us to Nazis, for example, which, you know, publicly, using the swastika.
I should also say, the woman making all of these these sort of like faces of disbelief is Camille Paglia, who is almost like the prototype, I feel like, for Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin in some respects.
Godmother of the intellectual dark web.
Yes, indeed.
Wasn't really something I was all that fond of, but I'm defenseless against that kind of female insanity, because the techniques that I would use against a man who is employing those tactics are forbidden to me. So I don't know. Like, it seems to me that
Wait,
it isn't
go
men that
backwards a
have-
little bit. Go backwards a little. He's saying like he's defenseless because his normal go-to in this situation, let's say there was a man organizing against his free speech thing, he would just go and beat them up, I guess.
Well, Pankaj Mishra called him they said he was sort of like a mythological, like, fascist in that sort of vein, and he said he'll slap him happily.
I'll slap you happily.
Was he mad that Sarah Huckabee Sanders got kicked out of a restaurant?
I'm sure.
To Nazis, for example, which, you know, publicly, using the swastika, which wasn't really something I was all that fond of. But I'm defenseless against that kind of female insanity, because the techniques that I would use against a man who was employing those tactics are forbidden to me. So I don't know, like, it seems to me that it isn't men that have to stand up and say enough of this, even though that is what they should do. It seems to me that it's sane women who have to stand up against their crazy sisters and say, look, enough of that, enough man-hating, enough pathology, enough bringing disgrace on us as a gender. But the problem there, and then I'll stop my little tirade, is that most of the women I know who are sane are busy doing sane things, right? They're off, they have their career, they have their family, they're quite occupied, and they don't seem to have the time or maybe even the interest to go after their crazy harpy sisters. And so I don't see any regulating force for that terrible femininity. And it seems to me to be invading the culture and undermining the masculine power of the culture in a way that's, I think, fatal.
Yeah.
And that's it. That line right there.
From your
There you
mouth
go.
to God's ears,
Masculine
Jordan
power.
Peterson.
Now,
We're undermining the culture, and we're not going to stop.
and I have to say, you know, people ask, like, why do we focus on Jordan Peterson in this way? And the only thing I could say is that I'm taking his cri de coeur to heart, and having to deal with my harpy male brothers who are insane. And so it's really up to us, non-insane masculine guys, to corral these lunatics on the.
And it's tough because most of the guys I know don't have time to spend, hours on the intellectual dark web.
Exactly. I've got friends who go out, they have jobs, and they go out and they have families, and they've got to go. Their wives want to go places. No, for me, I'll stay right here and just follow everything that Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin do. That's basically what I'm going to do.
I thought we were supposed to be treating people as individuals, not members of a group.
Harpies is a set of individuals.
Harpies.
You
He said at the end, the masculine power.
Oh, yeah.
Which, like, that whole diatribe was just basically about, like, we need to keep the patriarchy. I mean, we all know it, but he's like, no, it's not about patriarchy, it's about equality. And he just said it.
I think I mean, does he not explicitly say that he wants to keep the patriarchy? Or is that just like, it's not really a patriarchy, it's just the way things are?
Yeah, it's just a natural hierarchy.
Yeah, and anyone going against it is, going against nature. And
calling it patriarch is a slur against nature.
Exactly.
Nature,
yes.
My period's nature, and I get crazy around my period, so you have to freaking deal with nature, okay?
That is, it is like gravity.
Hysterical.
All right, Nomi, pick a number between 2 and 9.
7.
7 it is. You're calling from a 786 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, how's it going? It's been a long time. It's Tony from Miami. How you
Tony from Miami. How are you? What's on your mind, Tony? We got to be quick. We don't have too much time, bud. I'm sorry.
No problem. Oh, that's all good. It's okay. Hey, if that's the case, I'll bring up the two most important points. A, stop saying Ocasio. That's also my last name. It's Ocasio.
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 I got it right?
Alejandro Ocasio-Cortez.
You did. Ocasio-Cortez.
I think I have a well-established habit of butchering just about every name that comes out of my mouth.
Sam triangulates around names.
Exactly.
He's actually said it right a couple times, but he bounces it out.
Yeah, I like to mix it up.
You guys did. No, you guys did. Having Sam said it the way he does always takes me back to like grammar school.
Sorry, dude. Sorry.
Besides that, I think my second point was just after hearing Jordan Peterson, I don't know. I think debating him would feel a little intellectually redundant. But okay.
You're saying they need to just like settle it outside like men.
Not even, because
we would do the introductions and then I'd slap them silly. That's what I would do.
I guess so. Well, I think my last important topic actually was the detention center. I think I've mentioned to you, I live in Homestead, so the detention center was not that far away from my house. About maybe 15 minutes away driving. It's right next to the Homestead Air Force Base. Right next door, actually. Now, what was crazy was people are kind of outraged now, right, that this is happening, and people in Homestead, the politicians. The problem was that the detention center has been hiring since the ending of, I think, 2016 toward the beginning of 2017. So in my neighborhood, we knew already that there was a detention center holding children. My mother tried to have me apply because at the time we spoke about my financial situation, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to do it. I couldn't.
Right.
So she told me about it, whatever. But then she told me what they were hiring at. The salary that they were hiring at the beginning was around 19 to I think $22 an hour. They don't pay that here.
Yeah.
In Miami at all. They don't.
Wow.
So think about it. You have a town who's and this is probably one of the worst areas to be in, to live in. This is Naranja. Probably the highest per capita of crime rate in South Florida. Probably close to the South Bronx. Not even kidding. And I lived in the South Bronx. You know that. We spoke about that. So right now, that area is going through crazy amounts of gentrification. Okay, I mean, I'm talking about a whole apartment complex, got bought out and turned into condominiums.
Right.
Now going to rent for about maybe $1,200 a month.
Wow.
Okay.
So basically,
So-
you're saying that they came in and just started spending an enormous amount of money, and it's like literally turning around the
whole area.
Wow. You know, there's
now.
Hold on. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, on this
Well,
other show
this-
was on, Representative Swazi
no.
was on, and he's up for re-election. He's from Long Island, and it's in a swing district, and he's the Democratic nominee now. And we were talking about the detention centers, and I asked him if he'd be willing to end ICE. And, he did the Kamala Harris thing, like, we need ICE. And I said, well, it wasn't around, over a decade. It's a new agency. And then we got into the conversation about the detention centers, and he was basically defending them. He went down to the border, and he said, they're being run well, they're giving jobs, blah, blah, blah. Everybody there is very sensitive. And I said to him, I go, I find it fascinating that there's this financial opportunity for contractors to suddenly have these major contracts with government agencies every time we create some sort of like war, like we escalate the state. And it's shocking to me that the Democrats wouldn't investigate this. Will the Democrats investigate this? Because this is outrageous that they're making money off of dividing families and kidnapping children.
I would. Let me just hold on, Tony, 1 second. Hold on 1 sec. Just I interviewed David Dayen on Ring of Fire this week and about the two private prison entities, Core Civic and Geo, that are making enormous amounts of money off of this, and they were building up to it for years under the Obama administration as well. But go ahead, Tony.
Now, really quick. Just before news even showed up a couple of days ago, I got around to driving near the facility, actually, like right across. They had security everywhere. But the thing is, they're not top-notch security. These are just guys, schmoes like me with their license that's able to be cleared for just a simple security, just to work there. And they're getting paid more than I did working security, contracted at, commercial A-class buildings for like 7 years.
Wow.
Okay? Now, of course, you're going to jump on the opportunity, you're not going to tell anybody what you're doing, especially if they tell you not to do it. You know what I mean? A politician comes to my job, I don't care. I'm getting paid $22 an hour. Hey, you can't come here. Now, I find it baffling that for all this time they had no idea this was happening, because actually, my mom works down the street from the Air Force Base at a daycare center. A lot of her students or parents started working there. They started giving her information about, hey, look, well, they're hiring this because that are, because my mom was looking out for me, trying to get me a better job. I couldn't. Well, she told me what it was. So she gave me the email, and I couldn't do it. Now, the point was that this has been going on for a while. Now, before those children were even in the building, there were in tents across the street at the Air Force Base Park.
Jeez.
In the heat.
Okay. The building, I believe, was bought out, I think, or maybe possibly by Homeland, by HHS, if I'm not mistaken. And the building used to be Job Corps facility. If you're familiar with the Job Corps, institutions, and they're like kind of like boarding school, kind of vocational school thing, where they'll send the children there to learn vocation, stuff like that. But an incident happened there where that facility got shut down, I believe. But for a while, the children were being held in tents.
Wow.
Across the street for a while in the beginning. So I don't see, and this is where the problem is, these politicians are so detached to the community. The community knew way before Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Bill Nielsen to come on.
Right. Or, and maybe they're also, sensitive to the idea that people are making money off it. But I don't know, man. Appreciate the call. Thanks, man.
No problem.
All right,
I'll call back again. All right. You guys have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, Nomi, one more number.
3.
3. Let's see what we got here. This harks back to the old IM days, right, Matt? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. We have 20 8 callers on the line right now,
my
folks.
gosh.
So I'm telling you right now, we're not going to get to all of them. And I'm trying to see if there's one. Calling from a 315 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Al from Syracuse.
Hello, Al from Syracuse. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I love you guys. Oh, wow. I'm calling from the New York 24th, so we'll see if the teacher actually wants to flip us.
Yeah.
But
Probably won't make a difference.
I really wanted to ask about the Muslim ban case.
Yep.
To get it all straight. So, first, about the opinion itself, a lot of the commentators have been saying that it explicitly overrules Korematsu, right?
Right.
But that's just not how I read it, right? I mean, it uses the exact reasoning of Korematsu, but it's worse. Roberts pretty much says that the court will let Trump get away with anything that is neutral on its face, no matter what racist thing comes out of his mouth, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I guess I ask what's preventing Trump from more concentration camps, but we kind of already have them, right?
I think you're combining two things. I mean, I guess if they could come up with some type of argument as to why these asylum seekers, these parents coming in with their, 3 and 5 and 7 and 10 and 12 and 14-year-old kids are somehow a legit national security threat, but they don't even make that argument. Isn't
he talking about MS-13 all the time, though, right? So
well, you can talk about MS-13 all the time, but there's, you'd have to make the argument that they're, that you're legitimately, finding MS-13 members, and when 91% of the people who go through these processes are convicted, the convicted 91% are convicted of misdemeanors, you have a tough time proving that. And then here's the thing. The other 9%, you've found them.
Yeah.
You don't need to separate the other 91% to find that 9% of people who came in with drugs, or people who they got into a car accident, and maybe, whatever the array of felonies is. And so I don't know. It's conceivable. With this Supreme Court, though, I think, honestly, trying to define whatever the limiting principle is from reading some of these briefs, I just think that's a fool's errand. I mean, it may give you a perspective of where they're going to go or where they're willing to go in the future. But look, in the masterpiece, homophobic Baker case, one person sitting on the Civil Rights Board in Colorado says what is, by all accounts, a very neutral aspect about religion. Sometimes it's used for good, sometimes it's used for bad, is deemed to have basically tainted the entire process. But Donald Trump going out calling it a Muslim ban doesn't
make any sense.
It's over. The era of the pajama boy court is over.
Their excuse is that there's the presidential power intention is not brought into presidential power, which I don't even know where that I don't understand. I still don't understand the premise of that, because essentially this is now being used as a weapon for a police state.
And the idea that in some fashion the actions of the president are sort of extra governmental in such a way that it doesn't need the same level of scrutiny as any other government action is bizarre. There's no other way to describe it.
Yeah, so, I mean, that kind of gets into my second point about it.
All right, quick.
It's pretty much, I'll be really quick. It's just kind of the legacy of the different actors of this case, right? Roberts, I mean, I know he's supposed to be super obsessed with his legacy. So how can he be so unaware how this case is going to be seen?
Oh, dude, I think honestly, I think that Roberts is going to be a footnote in how fucked up this period is if we have people who can actually write history in the future. I mean, I think so. I mean, don't you think what happened with the Gorsuch seat was out of control? Don't you think the idea
Well-
don't you think the idea that Donald Trump, who very well, I mean, it's look, this is and we'll hopefully we're going to have somebody on next week to talk about this, but there seems to be a significant sense out there that shit's really going to go down this summer when it comes to Trump. And I've been reading a lot of Marcy Wheeler, and we'll hopefully have her on shortly. But when Marcy Wheeler starts thinking that stuff is coming down and that they're going for a much broader suite of convictions than obstruction, Donald Trump, a huge percentage of his loans were basically provided by this banker at Deutsche Bank.
Kennedy's son, right?
Yeah. Kennedy's son. I mean, like I say, John Roberts is going to be story like 12 when people talk about how screwed up this system was. So
all that's going to be left is the Aryan race, and they're just going to reinvent history for themselves.
That's right.
So
Roberts, they'll probably build a statue. I appreciate the call. All right, we got time for one more phone call, ladies and gentlemen.
Four.
All right. Calling from a 478 area code. Who's this?
Hello, Sam. This is Jeff. I'm calling you from sunny Orlando, Florida.
Oh, another Florida.
Jeff from Florida?
There are progressives in Florida.
Yeah, this
Who
is Jeff
knew?
in sunny Orlando, Florida. Sam, I run the tech for the Hall of Presidents down here. I have sport ticket AACE1678.
Wait, what?
Here, I'm just calling in response to your notices to us. We've noticed some strange behavior down here from some of the presidents. I swear FDR's eyes are following me around the room with murder in them. And they've been calling mid-tier talk shows throughout the week. I was just wondering if you heard from any of our presidents.
We did actually hear from FDR yesterday. Did we cut that? We did. Yes. Franklin Delano Roosevelt from the Hall of Presidents called in yesterday too.
Just naturally. Yeah.
Yes, it happens.
Pep talk.
In any case, I've really got to jump. I've got to replace the racial slur catch on the Trump bot for the third time this week. But the code phrase to disable such robots if they call you goes like this, quote, "That Jimmy Reefer Cake song was awesome," end quote. I specifically chose a phrase you are not likely to say on accident. Okay, well, I got to go on my lunch break, man. I got to head down to the pizza court and watch Darth Vader do the Macarena. Left is fast.
All right, appreciate the call.
Enjoy your time in Orlando, Jeff.
Jeff from Georgia in Atlanta. I mean, in Orlando. All right, one more number, Nomi.
5.
5.
Did I say that already or no?
Did you say 5 already? It's all right. You could say it twice.
Oh yeah, because a new one pops up, right?
567 is where are you calling from? Who is this?
This is Dave calling from Michigan.
Dave from Michigan, you're the final caller of the day. I apologize to the other 30 people holding.
Make it good, Dave.
This is big, Dave.
Well, I wanted to do my own version of identity politics and give a shout out to all the fantastic calls from the letter carriers you've been having lately.
We have a strong postal contingency.
You sure do.
Identity politics.
It's political flyer season now, and so we're getting hit with all the political flyers. And of course, there's always campaigns that try to get away with not paying postage and just putting theirs in and on mailboxes. So we always got to pull those out.
Oh.
I had one that came up the other day that was standout. It does have the usual young Republican trying to look like he's staying in the closet at church youth camp, but I'd never seen before somebody's endorsement quote from their own grandmother.
Oh my God!
Wow. All right.
Well, John and I have always been proud of our grandson Chase.
Of course, it's Chase.
Well, it would be much worse if the grandmother panned the guy. So
that's what my grandmother would do. May she rest in peace. She'd be like, she wasn't my favorite.
There you go. Could have been worse.
She wasn't the boy.
All right. Appreciate the phone call.
Jordan Peterson.
Oh,
has
you're
a
welcome.
point.
Have a good one, guys.
All right. You too. Bye bye. All right. We have time. One more phone call. We got so many people on hold. I'm sorry about this. Give me another number, Nomi.
7 again.
7 again.
I like odd numbers.
All right. 734 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. This is Jack from Michigan. Same state.
Oh, my gosh. Jack from Michigan. 2 Michiganders in a row. What's on your mind? Got to be quick.
All right. So got to add some ideas because unlike the Benedict Arnold of the 21st century, a.k.a. Dave Rubin, I actually like to add to society rather than subtract from society.
I understand.
So, yep. So I would say that if you really want to get a really bold progressive idea, this is a good one. So if the U.S. government funds a jobs program that would create a vaccine for cancer and get the amount of people dying from hunger down to like less than 100, there should be like all of the debt that's owed, all of the national debt that's owed to U.S. Loan investors or whatever it's called should be canceled because that would be because livelihood's more important than money. So I would think that.
All right. I mean, I think it's that there's a little bit of I think extra complexity to that doesn't necessarily have to be there. But I appreciate the sentiment, Jack. I mean, I think like look, we're already funding the cancer research. B, I think a jobs guarantee program probably is not going to be more so research oriented. C, I would also say that, look, the vast majority of money that we owe is to ourselves anyways. So we can definitely it's really an accounting issue. We can get rid of a lot of that. We can have a jubilee for ourselves. And while we're at it, we should also do one for student debt holders. But folks, I'm afraid that we are out of time, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to wrap this up.
How sad.
Nomi, thank you so much for joining us.
you.
It was so
This
much
was
fun
so
to have you
fun.
here.
You should come every Friday.
I mean, if you weren't in Brooklyn and I was in Queens and it didn't take me 9 hours to get here, I would do it.
It really is nuts.
It's so crazy because we're next to each other. It's like we need to up.
Where's the trolley that he promised? Where's the trolley?
Yeah, didn't
De Blasio talk about? Didn't De Blasio talk about the trolley?
De Blasio has no say over this. Remember, it's an MTA issue,
I feel
which a
like-
Republican is in charge of. Joe Lhota, who ran against De Blasio. Classic Cuomo.
All of our MTA funding has to go through Albany, right?
It's almost like Governor Cuomo has a say in his state. Who knew?
It is. I thought that there was something about like the trolley system that somehow De Blasio had more authority over. No?
I heard this idea floated. He says a lot of things.
Maybe a hovercraft or something.
It's not under the MTA still?
I don't know. That's what I thought. I mean, I haven't heard about it in now, I think, probably a couple of years.
I'm waiting for Elon Musk to do the Queens Brooklyn Hyperloop.
Why don't we have a Hyperloop here?
Isn't that the BQE, technically?
Oh, my God.
It's actually what it is. It's just never hyper.
When I started dating Sean, I lived in Williamsburg and he lived in Windsor Terrace, and it was basically like a long distance relationship.
It really is. That must take like an hour and a half to get there.
Yeah, I think what people need, like for those of you who aren't in New York, we're all really close distance-wise, but it takes forever.
Maybe 3 miles, probably
Yeah.
Queens to here. Maybe less.
Probably less. Well, they're touching. Yet I just came from Midtown, 34th Street in Manhattan, and it took me 23 minutes to get here. When I texted Sam right before I came, I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to get there in time. They're going to start the show. I'm not going to make it. Nope.
You have to go through Midtown, essentially, to get here anyways.
From Queens. Well, it was...
This is why I ride a bike to work most days, although I'm not one of those crazy people who can do it when it's cold out. So, and your makeup probably wouldn't look as nice as it does now if you'd ridden a bike here.
I'm afraid of riding bikes in New York, so that's a true act of courage.
It is. Thank you.
And just, thank you for your... No, I'm going to cut that joke off before I even say it.
All right, folks. We will see you on Monday.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid. finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years, while I shifted in and out of gear.